Today, we are going to be doing NFL record predictions for every single team in the NFL for 2024. As you can see on your screen, there's the 2024 NFL schedule grid. Shout out Sharp Football Analysis. We're going to start out with the AFC, move into the NFC. I'll put the link in the description if you want to do your own record predictions. I believe it is called Playoff Predictors, the website, and it's very useful. It is a lot harder than you think. We did this last year. When there's bad teams, it is really hard to get them wins sometimes. So I did it a couple times. I know Dobbs did it a couple times to just try to get something that seemed more realistic. But let's get right into it, Dobbs. Let's start out in the AFC East with the Buffalo Bills. A lot of people are down on the Bills this year because of the fact that they lost their number one weapon in Stephon Diggs. They ended up making a lot of cuts, but I think they did a good job setting themselves up for the future and kind of restructuring this team into the new generation championship contenders that the Buffalo Bills are going to be either this year or the coming years.
No, absolutely, Hunter. And so I had the Bills. Hold on. Let me just preface, like you already basically prefaced this, but before, you can already hear the comments. Fan bases. This is just across every fan base. This is so hard to do. Like, no commenting allowed until you go try to do this yourself, because you're going to see, you have all these ideas in your head of how things are going to go. And then when you get to actually typing it out, doing it game by game, and then each game has an immediate result on the other, you realize how quickly it is, or how hard it is quickly to get these teams where you thought they were going to be. I mean, when you see the schedule in front of you, it's not the same anymore. You got to give some teams a little bit of leeway. It's tough. Doing this is not easy. And by no means is this a guarantee or this is what's going to happen. When you put it out on paper, though, this is what, for me and Hunter, ended up happening.
And what's crazy, Dobbs, to kind of go off that is, for example, we'll get to the Titans, but when you're working on the Titans' early year schedule, you're like, oh my God, this is bad. They get their wins in the back half of the schedule, just from like what I was doing. And it's like, you'll have a team, not the Titans, but just in general, start like 1-5, and you're like, oh God, like this is not right. But it's tough. It's really tough. So go ahead. What were you saying?
No, I was just going to say, basically, no, like you just basically finished, like that's the whole point. The reality is this, look, this is just us with the matchups on paper, making a decision on the spot. But as we know too, Hunter, look, injuries happen. Superstars rise out of nowhere. Superstars fall out of nowhere. This is just with the information that we have present preseason. So many things change during the course of the season. Realistically, is this going to be a blueprint for really how the season's going to go? Probably not. But if it is, hey, you know what? Crystal ball us. This is our best effort. And if anything, it's just to create good discourse, some good, good fun discourse. So don't get to hating if your team isn't, number one. It's very hard. Trust me. We're going to leave the link in the description. Go do it yourself if you have any hate comments. You're going to see real quick how hard it is to make every team round out the way you want. But without further ado, let's get right into it, Hunter. And we're starting with the Buffalo Bills. And so what I got to say about the Bills, I'm sorry, Bills fans. It goes right along with what I just said, I got you guys narrowly missing out on the playoffs. I got them finishing here 9-8, second in the division, however. So it goes to show you, a little spoiler alert here, I guess. We only got one team, I won't say who yet, that's making the playoffs out of the AFC East for me personally. So, the AFC East, as far as my simming went, not anything, it wasn't greener pastures over here. But the reality is this, like you said already, the Bills, as much as I still expect Josh Allen to have a fantastic season, and I still think that this is a good team, right? You are, to an extent, starting over a little bit, right? Like right now, okay. And it's very interesting, just little tidbits, but a couple years ago with what happened to Damar Hamlin, right? We would have been shocked even, right? And it's amazing. It's awesome that he's playing again. Damar Hamlin is now the starting safety. So you can see, at least on the depth chart as of today, don't sue me if that's not how the season starts. But the bottom line is the Bills, and it's not just Damar Hamlin as an example. We could take much more than one example. We could take how the linebacking core is aging and there's new pieces coming in. We can talk about how the D line is starting to lose guys and new young guys are arising. The DB room is not at all the same as it was a couple years ago. All in all, right? And this O-line, I still have a lot of faith in. But the receiving corps this year, I just don't know. I don't know. And again, it's not the end all be all. The Bills totally could still make the playoffs. But just in this simulation, the way I had things going, I had them roughly just missing the playoffs too. And last thing I want to say that I forgot to include in the whole spiel, whenever I'm doing in divisional games, and I think it was the same for you, Hunter, I'm splitting them no matter what, no matter how big the difference of the quality of teams are, because it just seems like with divisional games, you never know how it goes. So I always split it. Whoever the home team was in that divisional game, I gave it to, right? So I just wanted to also include that.
So I had the Bills making the playoffs at 10-7. I think this is one of the teams that may struggle early, but will kind of find their win later on, just because of the fact of, I think the quarterback factor. I think Josh Allen has you good for about 10 wins, and I don't hate their wide receiver room. Their O-line is decent. I think James Cook can take another step, and I'm not, their defense won't be bad. Like, Sean McDermott will make sure that that defense is functional. But I think that's where you're really going to see the weaker side of the ball. I think maybe the Stephon Diggs effect may be a little bit overblown, because you look at the wide receiver room and you have Keon Coleman as your number one technically, and you have Curtis Samuel in there as well, Khalil Shakir. But a lot of people forget about Dalton Kincaid because he is a tight end. Like, he's more of a weapon, similar to how Brock Bowers is being considered a weapon for the Raiders. So if you look at the Buffalo Bills schedule, and I'm not going to name it out, but, you have Arizona, right? You have Tennessee on there. You have Seattle, and Seattle's not a pushover. And you have New England twice. So those alone should get you to about 5-6 games. And then you're talking about, beating teams like Jacksonville, beating teams like Tennessee, beating teams like the Rams and the Lions. Like, the Rams are one of those teams where it's like they could have a really good season. They could also have a pretty rough season. And I don't want to say pretty rough season. I would lean more on them being a stronger competitor this year because of all the additions they've made. But it's like those are more split games, if you know what I'm talking about. And they're not going to be pushovers when they play San Francisco or when they play Kansas City. Like, they could very easily beat Kansas City. We know Kansas City, even though Kansas City is later in the year, I believe it is week 11. Kansas City doesn't necessarily always turn it on till the last couple weeks. Like, they usually will struggle earlier in the year. Week 11 is a little bit more midseason. But with all that being said, I think it's safe to say that the Buffalo Bills are not going to be pushovers this year. I think they still remain competitive. I still think they find a way into the playoffs. In mine, I have them winning the division, but they have the same record as another team in the division. It's just based off division record. So they very well could not win the division and still make the playoffs. But with that being said, yeah, I mean, I think the Buffalo Bills are a little over. I think I've come around to them personally. I think they're a little overhated this year. I think they can be a playoff team and maybe win a playoff game. I don't know how much deeper they'd go than that, but I think anything's possible with Josh Allen.
No, yeah, and I just want to, last thing while we're still on the Bills, I want to be crystal clear, Bills fans. Do I still think that the Bills can make the playoffs? Absolutely. It just didn't come out that way on this schedule simulation. I mean, that's really the bottom line. But the Bills are definitely still right there with a couple of these other teams that I have at the bottom of the teams that ended up making the playoffs, which we'll get to in just a little bit here. So stay tuned.
All right, let's move in to our next team, the Miami Dolphins. Where did you have them?
Dolphins fans might have been getting hopeful when I said there was one more team in the AFC East that was going to be taking a playoff spot home. And unfortunately, I'm sorry, Dolphins fans, it's not you guys. I had the Dolphins finishing out at 9-8, right? And going 3-3 in divisional play. Like, as I said, I crystal clear. I split division play based off who's home and who's away. It makes it much easier for this because one way or another, usually it kind of gets split, whatever. Some team's going to take it that wasn't supposed to take it. You kind of just use that divisional game split as kind of your, I don't know when a team is going to lose the game, but they're going to lose one that they shouldn't lose eventually kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
It's like, so I had the Dolphins at 9-8. Let's just evaluate the Dolphins from the perspective of realistically, there's areas of this team that are amazing, but there's also areas where I don't necessarily know what to expect. And I think that the not knowing what to expect is the biggest thing this year. there's a lot of like, I don't know what I'm trying to think the right word here. There's a lot of like caveats to this season that I feel like maybe not a lot of people have like considered. And it's very interesting. Like, let's just start with, okay, right? The O-line replacements for one. So, the Dolphins O-line, as we knew and know, notoriously a couple years ago was like, this unit's the worst unit in the league. If they don't do something soon, Tua is going to be right in the hospital for a long time. And he's not going to be able to be an NFL quarterback. He's like, that was kind of the narrative, right? Well, they kind of not kind of. They really turned it around. They really got things going. And then you lose two important pieces of your O-line. Can these replacements, namely in this case, Isaiah Wynn, who again, the tackle guard versatility, but a little shaky on the inside. And then also, right, we just moving Robert Jones, right? Okay. But and then also Aaron Brewer as well. So the reality, I think, at this point for the Dolphins is like, look, the offense, the receiving core is amazing. I'm a little shaky on the O-line, but then to the defense is where things get really just the most confusing is because, right, whenever you have a new defensive coordinator coming in, I think we can all agree it's just you never know what to expect, right? Like we're either going to make a jump or a regression. Very, very rarely is it going to just be kind of like middling out how you were. And it's just, I don't know, like you lost a legend last year. And if you're going from a legend to, and again, this isn't anything against the new defensive coordinator. It's just when you're going from Vic, I'm going to say like the easiest way to say it is if Vic didn't work, then it's just hard for me to believe anyone. I don't, and that might be completely unfair. I know there's a lot of rumors how Vic and this team just weren't meshing, but I think the biggest thing for me is just that I don't know how to feel about this defense. I think there's enough question marks, especially with the pass rushing injuries. Like the defense to me is just too much of a question mark on top of the fact that now, again, this is more of a long-term thing, but Tua taking up all that salary cap, Hunter, long-term, as we talked about, the future of this team, I don't even know what to expect. It's kind of puts them in a rough position because if you're the Dolphins, you kind of do got to strike now while the iron's hot and you have all these amazing offensive weapons. But then the other side of things, do you have enough firepower on defense? I'm not sure they do.
What record did you have for them? Just so I could put it in. You had 9-8?
Yeah, 9-8.
That's what I had as well. And I want to point something out here. So this is from Colin Coward. So take it with a grain of salt. But the stats are the stats. Tua under 50 degrees is 1-7, 9 touchdowns, and 12 interceptions. In the back half of their season, I'm going to go from week 12 out, which is, I believe, November 21st. It should be around there, right? They play at Green Bay, at Cleveland, at New York Jets. Those are not easy games, and those are cold environments. And if you even want to go into week like 9 and 10, they play at LA, so not bad. But before that, they play at Buffalo. So that's 4 games right there that may be under 50 degrees. And we saw how much Tua struggled in that game. I mean, listen, anybody would struggle in that Kansas City game, but the Chiefs didn't struggle as much as the Miami Dolphins did. And the reality is, the Dolphins, I saw this on Twitter, so I'm not stealing it. I forget who said it, but they're like a convertible. They work great in the summer, but when it gets to the back half of the season, we see them struggle. They could very well be 9-4 up until that point, and then lose 4 games just because of the weather. So I do like the Dolphins and what they've done on offense, but I think we all have opinions when the offseason starts, Dobbs. And I think it's almost the team's job to change. I think it's a team's job to change your opinion with the moves they make through free agency, through the draft, through just decisions that happen in the offseason. I don't know if the Dolphins got better. I don't know if they got better. And that is my main problem with them. I don't know if they got better.
You know what I want to add to that, Hunter? Because that was basically, we're on the same wavelength right now. And here to me is like far and away the biggest issue with the Dolphins. And we talked about this last year, but it's still just as relevant today. I think the Dolphins are one of those teams that, yes, they're a contender, but they're a very top heavy contender. Now, like, what do I mean by that? I mean, if you have one or two guys injured that are playmakers on this team, they go from being contender to pretender very quickly. Like, just realistically, I mean, come on, guys. If we take Tyreek Hill out of the game and it's a playoff game, if we take Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, do it. I mean, we've seen it. That's actually, and that's a possible thing to happen during the course of the season. And if Tua is not, and that's every team, you can say a certain quarterback, but we've seen, right. And thankfully last year wasn't a repeat, but we've seen that Tua's had issues staying healthy in the past, and hopefully that never happens again. But the bottom line is this team is very top heavy on Tua, the receiving core, and Mike McDaniel working together and just balling out on teams, like you said, in the early parts of the year when the weather's good. When that's not happening, what is this team's identity? And I think that's something that people need to consider. Yes, they're a good running team. They have a great running back committee that balances out well with this receiving core. But when the weather, like we just said, when it's January and February and the games really matter, are they still playing the same football? As of right now, objectively, no. And it's up to them to change our minds. That's all there is to it at this point. I mean, we've seen the same thing. Now it's up to them to change our narrative.
All right, let's move in to the New England Patriots. I had them at 3-14. When you guys do this, yeah, ooh is right. I think they have the worst record out of all the teams. I could be wrong though. No, I think they're tied with another team. But when you guys look at their schedule, realistically, where do you see the wins? At Tennessee, versus Indianapolis, at Arizona. Like, every team they play, I could eat. Listen, they're not going to go 0-17. They won't. They have a pretty good defense. They're not pushovers. But I really, really, really struggle with that offense. And I don't know if I trust the coaching staff. The things about Drake May have not been all that positive coming out of training camp. I've heard a lot about the issues on the offensive line. First-year coaching staff. Jacoby Brissett's going to be starting. Got rookie receivers pretty much out there. The O-line is a question mark. You know what? The defense isn't as good as the Jets, but it damn near reminds me of the Jets with Zach Wilson.
I swear to you, you literally just took the first thing I was going to say straight out of my mouth. Like that, and that's the thing. So Patriots fans, let's be clear and up front. This defense rocks shit. They hold down the boat. They do their job. This is not. If you're a Patriots fan and you love the defense, then don't leave a hate comment. It has nothing to do. It has nothing to do with the defense. This has everything to do with the fact that, just like Hunter just said, we have seen, and the Jets aren't the only example, right? We can pull out other ones. When a team is too defensively top heavy, the offense doesn't hold up their end of the bargain. It's just realistically only a matter of time before that defense not only takes their foot off the gas, but it's just once the defense takes their foot off the gas, you basically are losing a chance to win 9 out of 10 games. And that's exactly where the Patriots are at. When the Patriots are going to win games this year, it's going to be because the defense played a hell of a game and the offense did just enough. And you look back and you're like, all right, and we love to say complimentary football. They will be complimentary football games. And to the Patriots' credit, could they pull out one where they really surprise us and Jacoby Brissett throws a couple, crazy and runs it in once and the Patriots put up 35 points? It's possible, yes. But is it going to be something we're going to see more than once or twice this season? No. And so that's the bottom line, is that this is a incredibly defensively heavy team. They have a good defense, but then, when you include in that, you have to throw this caveat in also, which is also part of the problem with the Patriots, is that a lot of the good defenders on this team, again, I did not say all Patriots fans don't, not all, but a fair number of them are starting to get a little older. You have to start thinking about who you're going to replace with. But then, yes, also you do have still good young defenders, right? I'm not just going to ignore the Christian Gonzalez's, the Christian Barmores.
But is
Patriots,
Christian Barmore going to be playing this year?
Well,
the blood cuts are an issue.
And I'm going to throw out Christian Gonzalez too, right? Everybody always thinks that just because someone's good at football, they get injured, they're going to come back and be the same great football player. It's not always how things work, right? Because injuries are a real thing that your body has to work through. Everybody always just thinks it's like a video game. And, he's out for 4 weeks. He's going to come back and it's the same. Guys, and again, I hope Christian Gonzalez comes back the same. I hope Barmore comes back the same. But when you're coming back from serious injuries, you never know what to expect. So that's just another thing we can throw on the table right there for the young guys. But bottom line, defense is going to carry this team. I don't think we're going to see Drake made this year. I hope we don't for his development. We'll probably see a Jacoby Brissett year. And really, what else is there to say? Just defensive heavy team. It's going to be pretty much very similar to last year. And hopefully for Patriots fans, Drake can make a huge sophomore jump.
Where did you have their record?
I had him at 4-12 or 4-13. So we were really close.
Yep. 4-13. So really just one win off. So safe to say you don't have them making the playoffs.
Yeah, safe to say there is a incredibly slim chance of that happening.
All right, let's move on to our last team in the AFC East. We have the New York Jets. I have them at 10-7. I have them making the playoffs. This is a team that last year we, on paper at the beginning of the year, I think both picked to make the Super Bowl. And,
I remember that day.
Yeah, and then Aaron Rodgers went down and screwed the pooch. So I think the biggest thing, Dobbs, that I kept in mind when making this decision to put them at 10-7 is honestly, I had them originally finishing a couple games higher, maybe like 11-6, 12-5 type area. And then I remembered this team is unproven. They have not. I'm trying to think, but it's been a while since this team has even touched 10 wins. Am I wrong? So I'm pulling up the stats now.
Do some math in my head.
The last time they had 10 wins was 2015. So it's like, how am I going to put them at 11-6? How am I going to put them at 12-5 when they haven't proved it? They haven't been able to get over the 7-win hump since 2015, like when they had 10 wins. So I guess all of that to say is the Jets could very well have more than 10 wins this year. But until I'm able to see it on paper with this team, I mean, Aaron Rodgers is old. He's coming off an Achilles tear. Like Mike Williams, who's their wide receiver too, they very well could go trade for Devontae Adams at the deadline. That may be a real possibility. But Mike Williams, until we see he can stay healthy, I really like what they did with the offensive line. If they can stay healthy, I think the Hassan Reddick debacle is kind of ridiculous. That might be one of the biggest fumbles if he does not sign the extension, to give away a conditional second-round pick for a guy or a conditional third that can turn into a second. It's just kind of ridiculous. But with that being said, I mean, the Jets open up at San Fran, but then they get Tennessee, New England, and Denver, and then Minnesota. So they could very easily start the season 4-1, 5-0 if they beat San Francisco. And, their schedule really isn't all that hard. I mean, they end up they obviously play New England twice. They play in Indianapolis. They play Arizona. They play Seattle. The Jacksonville, I was always 50-50 on who's winning versus Jacksonville because they're always, a shot in the dark. You don't know what you're going to get out of them from week to week. So all that to say, the Jets have a favorable schedule and a very, very good team. But I need to see them do it on paper first. And is this going to be a situation where, I don't know. It's really hard because Aaron Rodgers is the whole offense. If Aaron Rodgers is not there, this team does not go anywhere. So it really rides on a 39-year-old guy coming off a torn Achilles. It's very, very, very risky.
No, well, 100%. I think, and every Jets fan would agree that right now, and let me just open by saying, if everything goes perfect, right, as we said last year, nothing's changed. This team, Jets fans, is still a team that can go win the Super Bowl. Me and Hunter both are on that train. There's nothing that would stop us from saying that the Jets are a Super Bowl capable roster. But that's the difference, right? Is that we haven't seen them come out and do it on the field like some of these other teams that I'm willing to say are Super Bowl contenders also. So the Jets are a little bit different. So let me just say this right off the bat so I don't confuse anyone. I have them also at 10-7, right? So we were thinking the same thing. Where I could have given them more wins, even on
first. They made the playoffs, right?
Wait, what was that?
Do you have them making the playoffs?
Yeah, they were the one team. They were the team that won the division, make the playoffs out of the AFC East. But so my thing was just, look, I don't want to give them first run through. I had them at 12, 13 wins. And I'm like, same thing you're saying. There's too much. And even I think this is the biggest thing. And I think Jets fans even they're not going to want to hear this, but they're going to understand where I'm coming from. even if it's not something catastrophic again, it doesn't have to be. I think what's much more likely than something like that happening is something like this, where, 3-4 weeks into the season, 5 weeks into the season, A-Rod's telling the staff, hey, maybe this week I need to heal up a little bit. Like maybe we gotta, I don't want to go back out there and risk something bad. And then plays good again, good again. Week 12 comes around. Hey, maybe I need this week off, and maybe it's best because I'm getting much older and I'm coming off a super serious injury. And we've already seen that there's been a few things, lingering already that we saw early in camp and stuff. So I think it's something much more likely like that, where maybe he's just missing a week here and there due to soreness, whatever, playing it precautious for the playoffs. That to me is the biggest thing, Hunter. I don't think it's going to be like anything catastrophic. Much more just the Jets have already showed us some of their star players are a little injury prone here and there, miss a week here, miss a week there. I think it's just stuff like that adding up that I would expect much more than something catastrophic. But I do think something like that is, I don't want to use the term likely for something like that, but it's definitely not unlikely either. It's kind of in the 50-50 range. So when something like that's on the table, to your point, I just couldn't really push him over the edge and make him the best team or one of the top teams in the AFC.
One last note I want to say about the Jets is I do get concerned with the fact of if everything is not going as planned, they seem like a team that a lot of dysfunction can happen, right? Like we already see it. Like, is the Hassan Reddick issue an omen for the year? Like, really, is it? Like, we saw what happened last year with Zach Wilson and, the general feeling about Nathaniel Hackett, and then the thing comes out about Saleh, like I don't want to call it a hit piece, but it was just like a look into the Aaron Rodgers situation with Zach Wilson and Robert Saleh, and things have not been run well for the New York Jets in the last couple years, and nothing changed with the Hassan Reddick trade so far. So why am I expecting that if things don't go right, that this isn't going to blow up in their face?
Before we move on from the Jets, the last thing I have to say, because I don't know how I glazed over it. No, that's the biggest problem is with a lot of other teams. Like, let's say the Jets had a really good coach. If the Jets had because that's the difference is that Robert Saleh hasn't proved like we'll use Dable, for example. Okay. Like let's compare Dable and Saleh. Similar results generally, right? Minus the one playoff anomalies here. But that's the point is that Dable showed us that even when shit's not rocking his way and really they have no business being able to be a competitive team, this team will still find a way to be competitive. Versus with Saleh, when they had every business to still be or every right to still be competitive and already right, that's how this team was set up. They weren't, and they fall apart. That's really what makes it so hard to put a lot of faith into this team is that, to your point, like you're saying, Hunter, it's not like, oh, we're just relying on Rodgers and he's our main guy when he's on the field. It's almost like we don't really have much faith in the coaching staff either. Like A-Rod, you're damn near the head coach and the star player. Like we need Jets fans need A-Rod out there for everything, right? Calling offense, doing everything. So that's the final caveat that makes it so hard to put a bundle of faith into the Jets.
All right. Well, we both have the Jets making the playoffs. I also have the Bills. At the end of each conference, I'll just flash the playoff teams on the screen so we can all know. Moving in to the AFC North. I had the Baltimore Ravens at 13-4. I think I have them as the best record in the NFL. My only concern, I will say, with this team comes with the line. The only starters that are returning are Ronnie Stanley and Tyler Lindenbaum. You have Andrew Voorhees was a 7th-round pick last year. I believe he's tore his ACL like at the combine or something like that. And then, you went out and you drafted Roger Rosengarten, but I think they've had Patrick McCarry playing right tackle for now. And then you have Daniel Falele at right guard. So
very interesting about the Falele thing.
Yeah, I think isn't he like gigantic? Like I could be wrong. Isn't he like 300 something? 300.
I was literally going to go on this little just tidbit when I was 6'8", 380 playing
for a guard.
Now, again, the weight I don't have a problem with at all. I mean, it doesn't matter. But he's so long. Picturing him playing guard is quite interesting. But the Ravens, they're seeing it in camp every day. They have a vision that I don't. I just wanted to throw that out because that is quite interesting.
I think the Ravens are kind of like a team like the Packers or the Cowboys where they have been able to kind of keep their line functional and actually pretty good, even if they don't have the all-stars playing there. So I want to give them the benefit of the doubt because the other area that does scare me is they don't really, they've never really been a team in the recent years that have got their production off the edge, and they are definitely not going to be getting that this year.
If anything, too, it's like edge by committee. You know what I mean?
Right,
it's like
right.
it's like they don't have like the guy out there.
Right. And so, I'm not worried about their defense. I think Zach Orr is now going to be their defensive coordinator. He was their linebacker coach last year, and I think they'll be okay. From my understanding, the main difference between Zach Orr and Mike McDonald is Zach Orr was a player, so everything is not going to be, just from what I've gathered from like reading and listening about the Ravens this year, is it's not going to be like, okay, this down and distance, we're going to call this play because this does this and this does this. This lines up with this yardage. And obviously there's going to be little bits of that. But Zach Orr was a player, and it's like, let's try to create like an explosive play here because we know we can force them to do this and this down and distance. And it's a little bit more like, I don't want to say freestyling, but a little bit more like, I guess, calling plays on vibes compared to like, the straight like guidelines. So
giving the players control more than anything.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I'm gonna be interested to see what the Ravens defense looks like this year. I really do think I was listening to the Athletic football show today, and they made a really good point. And they're talking about how Lamar has always been, the main point of attack on offense. And he's still gonna be the main point of attack, but who has really been like the secondary punch, right? It's been like Mark Andrews, right, who's a very good player. But now your secondary punch is Derrick Henry, who has played behind a horrible line, a pretty bad line in Tennessee. Now, the Ravens line isn't proven. If they can be average, just imagine what a rushing attack of Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry could do. I do have a little bit of reserve with the wide receiver room as well. Once it gets past Zay Flowers, but I think they've been able to work with that. Second year in the offense, I just think like if you give me any team in the NFL besides the 49ers, the Ravens are the other team that I'm going to pick to have the best record.
No, and that's totally fair. I ended up, and you know what? I don't want to spoil anything, but I didn't have. How about this? This is good. This is good. Not spoiling much. I didn't have any team personally past 12 wins, okay. Right? Like my cap was 12 wins. I had the Ravens rounding out at 11-6. Now, again, Ravens fans, like I've prefaced to a lot of teams, does that mean that that's for sure how I think you guys are going to finish? No, absolutely not. To your point, Hunter, I could see the Ravens finishing. Ravens could have a year 14-3, right? 13-4. I could totally see something like that. 100%. This is just how it ended up the week to weeks in. But to the bottom line of this team, right? Just to round out, because you homered on every point that I really needed to hit on. But look, you're bringing back almost every piece, almost but almost every really important one. We can say that for sure. Almost every really important piece to this defense, really minus just. I mean, at this point, really, it's actually not even it's really not like a big deal, right? This is why you can pick and choose guys that made an impact, but it's not like there's the guy who's starting over them, they're losing impact, if that makes any sense. Like, all in all, this Ravens defense is absolutely stacked. Probably on paper, the best defense in the league, right? I mean, I think we can agree with that on paper. And then you come over to the offense, and like you said, Voorhees, you're worried because coming off of such a major ligament tear, later round pick, you don't know what to expect. There's no doubt about that. I think Roger Rosengarten in this offense specifically too. I think he's going to have a really, really good rookie year. I think he's going to fit into this offense really well. You're really just worried about the guard situation, Falele and Voorhees. Falele is very interesting though, because having a 380-pound 6'8" dude at the guard spot is just going to look. I mean, I just can't wait to see how it looks on tape week one. That's going to be quite interesting. But we'll see how it goes because there's plenty of ways that doesn't work out. But I'm getting off on tangent. The bottom line is receiving core, like you said, Hunter. That's the biggest thing with this team where I still am a little worried because we've seen teams have showed us when you can effectively really take Lamar out and you have a defense that can really hold the edge and really maintain gap integrity on their rushes. And the plan is very gap oriented. You really can find a way to give the Ravens a day. And I think that's my biggest thing with the Ravens is until they can just really, it's been the word of the offseason for them. They need another alpha on offense. And yes, Derrick Henry is that guy. He is that other alpha, but he plays running back. He's not going to be shaking linebackers out there in the flats. He's not going to be right. I'm talking about in pass situations. So they need another alpha pass catcher along with Mark Andrews. And I think I will be really, really sold that this Ravens team is not that I'm already not. This Ravens team is already competing for the Super Bowl. But I would say that on paper, the Ravens would officially be top dogs on paper if they could just get that other alpha. They just haven't done it yet. And it's been our big bright ball off season.
I think Zay Flowers would be a great like 2. I don't know if you ask him to be that 1, if he can be that guy. And just kind of last thoughts on the Ravens personally. I don't think Eddie Jackson is burnt toast just yet. I think he still has a little bit of juice in him. And I think adding Eddie Jackson to the room with a safety room of Marcus Williams and Kyle Hamilton allows you to move Kyle Hamilton around on that defense because we know how versatile he can be. So adding Eddie Jackson to play with Marcus Williams and then being able to take Kyle Hamilton and really have him blitz off the edge, like play wherever you want him to play, I think adds such a great versatility to this defense. But let's move in to the Cincinnati Bengals. Where did you have them ranked, Dobbs?
All right. So I had the Bengals, funny enough, 3rd in the division.
Ooh.
But Bengals fans, don't worry. You guys still made the playoffs. I had them finishing out at 11-6, 3rd in the division. And so let's kind of start with the Bengals, right? I think like the bottom line is this, because I think you'll agree with this, Hunter. When you really wrap the Bengals up and you take a look at them on paper, their roster just realistically doesn't compare to some of the other top teams position to position, right? Like we're looking at this roster and we're saying, okay, Zach Taylor and Joe Burrow have showed us that they are an incredibly elite duo together when Joe Burrow's healthy. And the Ravens, or not the Ravens, the Bengals are kind of in the situation now, but you could even you could compare it to how the Ravens have been, where that when Joe Burrow's out there, much like when Lamar's out there, other stuff doesn't have to be perfect, right? Like there's such X factor game changers that you're putting not all of, but you're putting 90% of your faith that you're going to win the game in that, yeah, Joe Burrow's going to go have himself a day. And there's nothing wrong with that. Joe Burrow has showed us throughout the course of his college career and now in his NFL career that you can put that pressure on his back and he's going to deliver. Now it's just a matter of, is he going to be able to be out there long enough and can they keep him healthy enough that he can do his thing enough this season to get them into that playoff spot? Because if he's healthy for the majority, if not the whole season, the Bengals very likely are going to make the playoffs just off of his back. That's kind of like the reality and the narrative for this team. But again, I want to be clear, not like they don't have other really good players on this ball team, right? Like Mike Hilton has turned into an elite slot corner. Geno Stone is one of the better safeties in the league, right? We all know about Trey Hendrickson. The O-line is definitely starting to really come together. You have an identity, you have a vision past just this year, right? Like as far as the draft went and everything, like the Bengals have a vision. I'm really excited for this receiving core, really excited for Burton. I think the way that this receiving core is going to mesh is going to be a very electric unit. And then, back to the running back, like apparently Chase Brown is supposed to have an amazing year this year. And we've just been sleeping on Chase Brown. If word out of the Bengals, Bengals training camp, Bengals land over there is right. So the Bengals, it's not like they're far from shabby and they still have a lot of positions filled. Bottom line I'm trying to make is just tie everything together. They're not like a top dog roster like some of these other AFC teams. But when you have Joe Burrow on the team, how are we going to sell him short? How are we going to sell this team short?
That's pretty much my synopsis of the team in terms of like, I'm not going to sell Joe Burrow short if he can stay healthy. And I have them at 10-7, making the playoffs as 2nd in the division. I don't know how, if Joe Burrow's healthy and Jamar Chase stays healthy, and I really don't know what to say outside of the fact of the Bengals come in every year, regardless if they start slow and compete, right? Oh, Ari, hold on. This goes for a team. The Patriots are working to trade Pro Bowl Matthew Judon to the Falcons.
That's a major Falcons W. Falcons fans, major, because Falcons fans know how bad they need that man on the roster.
Oh, they really need pass rush. But anyway,
that major W Falcons fans, hey, from as an honest Saints fan, like I say, I'm always objective. That That's a major W down there in the ATL.
Breaking news on, mind you, this is being recorded August 14th. But with that being said, back to the Bengals. I think that Zach Taylor has done a phenomenal job coaching the Bengals for so long. And Burrow, I think, is in a spot where he looks a little bit bigger. He added some weight, and they have been trying to get back to that Super Bowl for quite a couple years now. And I think, I don't want to say this may be the year to do it, but I'm not too worried about them not having the best roster, if that makes sense, right? Like, we'll get into the Browns next, and I think the Browns have a much better roster. But when we talk about quarterback position, at the end of the day, Deshaun Watson played like a bottom 5 quarterback last year. Joe Burrow is not a bottom 5 quarterback by really any stretch of the imagination. So that offense, I don't think they lose a step with Tyler Boyd leaving. I think with Jermaine Burton there, they're snapping. And the reason they franchise tag T. Higgins is because they're trying to win a Super Bowl this year. If they figure it out with Trey Hendrickson, I think they improve their safety room. I think their defense is still pretty decent. I don't understand why this team cannot make another run at the Super Bowl. And if you look at their schedule, they play New England, they play Washington, they play Carolina, they play the Giants, they play Las Vegas, they play the Chargers, depending how you feel about them, they play Tennessee, and they play Denver and Pittsburgh, depending on how you feel about them. They have a favorable schedule. This could be a realistically a 11-win team, kind of like you had them. So this team, I think, is poised to make another run. And if it's going to be any year, it's going to be this year, because then they're going to have to pay Chase, they're going to have to pay Higgins, and it's just going to be a completely different team, I feel like, next year.
And a lot of these guys that have been staples on the team for years, they're getting older. It's just something we got to, Bengals fans, I'm not trying to make you upset, but it's got to be acknowledged, right? I mean, Von Bell is getting older, right? Logan Wilson's getting older. Jermaine Pratt's getting older. Sam Hubbard's getting older. I mean, when you look across the board, the core that was for so long, and especially that 20, how am I blanking on the year here? The Bengals Rams Super Bowl. I was blanking because I think the year the season was played, and then I don't think of what was the year the Bulls played?
It was 2020, I believe.
Okay, so I know, because I say that's what I thought. I was going to say 2019 and then at 2020. But you guys get on.
Wait, Burrow was drafted in 20.
No, it's for
2021. It's a 2020 season. I think it was 2021 though.
That's where I always get messed up. Is that I know it's the season. You got to carry over the year from the season, but getting sidetracked. The bottom line is, as Bengals fans, know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it was 2021 because I remember it was his second year.
That core from that team, they're getting older. And now, not to say that the window is closing, but the window with that group, realistically, yeah, the window with that group is closing. So, that's kind of just the reality for the Bengals right now. And I don't think Bengals fans would disagree with that. I think that they would say, as long as they're not in delusional land and they're willing to be honest, that yes, this is still a really good team. This is still a really good roster. But if you don't do it this year or very soon, there's going to be a significant amount of turnover before you can really get back to being that real championship contender, no matter how much Joe Burrow does for this team.
All right, let's move in to the Cleveland Browns. I had them at 10-7 as well, but due to the fact of divisional wins and everything like that, I have them actually missing the playoffs. And I think the Browns have done a good job. I think their defense is going to be phenomenal again this year. I struggle with Deshaun Watson a lot. I have not seen, watching him these last couple years on the Browns, he doesn't have any of the magic that he had in Houston. And I think that comes from not playing. I think it comes from outside circumstances, obviously, and then that affects him on the field. With that being said, though, I don't know if Deshaun Watson is ever going to be that top 5 quarterback ever again. But the Browns don't need him to be that. The Browns literally need him to be average. If he can be league average, this Browns team can go far. I really, really dislike their wide receiver room. I think Cooper is fine, right? But you go out and you trade for Jerry Jeudy. Elijah Moore, I don't think is what a lot of people thought he was. I think that was a good idea to go trade for him at the time. And when you look at the receiver room, who do you have hope for outside of Tillman? Tillman is really the only guy that can make a difference in the receiver room outside of Cooper. And
Browns fans will tell you that we're sleeping on Judy, but we've already had this discussion. We already had this discussion plenty of times.
He's just very inconsistent. And the same thing with Elijah Moore. You need consistency out of your, top 3 receivers, or literally top 2. I think another thing that scares me is that was a horrific knee injury to Nick Chubb.
Well, and also let's just throw this out while we're on the subject, because I almost forgot. I know you would have forgot real quick too. We can't glaze this over. Now all of a sudden we're in a land here, Hunter, where the Browns and Amari Cooper beefing on the low. Amari Cooper dropping sub tweet, sub Instagram. I almost said subconscious. You get what I'm saying. Amari Cooper's out here dropping hints that they rubbed him the wrong way. And when you're a team like the Browns that's been struggling for so long to finally get a culture going together, the last thing you want to do is really piss off one of the guys that kind of really help you get that culture going. Just a tidbit. We'll keep moving forward with the Browns here. I just had to throw that out while we were still on the offensive subject.
I mean, I love their offensive line in terms of what they can do. I like the interior that they have. They went back and got Nick Harris from the Seahawks after he just left. I like their tackle situation. I don't love it, but it's decent. But at the end of the day, I think the biggest thing to me is I don't trust Deshaun Watson to be good. I don't. Anymore. I don't.
It's the only thing you think about with this team, because that's the problem, Hunter. Is you look at this team on paper and you're like, you're rubbing your hands together. You're like, they're cooking. And if you had no knowledge, if you were super casual in football, and I'm talking real casual, casual in terms of me to soccer. I check the stats once every couple years and, you get an update. To a super casual fan, you look at this Browns roster and you're like, oh, okay. And they have Deshaun Watson? How could this team not go make a Super Bowl run? But again, right, and everyone knows it's been keeping up. It's not breaking news, but it has been the same Deshaun. But that's not even what I really wanted to, that's not really the whole point of this spiel. What I think that I wanted to bring up is, and we talked about this before, but what this contract with Deshaun Watson really did is I think it highlights 2 things, because I want to really hammer this point home. And again, this is why too, everybody knew that when the contract happened, no matter what was going to come of it, it was very likely going to be a mistake. Because there's this innate thing about human nature, that everybody knows, but it somehow got overlooked on this contract, where if you take away the hunger and you take away the purpose behind showing up every day, and you just say, no matter how bad you do, you're literally going to be worth $250 million. Go figure that most human beings are going to subconsciously take that foot off the gas a little bit. They're going to practice an hour less every day. They're going to spend a little more time at the club. They're going to, and again, and let me be crystal clear on this too, because this is what I'm going to hear in the comments. Is people can say, that's not Deshaun though. It's been because of the injury. I believe it's very much a combination of both. I still think Deshaun Watson is incredibly talented, and he still could be closer to that guy we saw. But at the same time, I also believe that these injuries are definitely taking a big toll on him, especially shoulder injuries, throwing injuries, throwing arm injuries. The most important spot really is a quarterback, minus your ACL, meniscus you could have hurt. So I think it's a combination. I want to be crystal clear. It's not just one or the other. I think it's a combination of you gave somebody a guaranteed estate for the rest of their life, and they're also dealing with really critical injuries. It's pretty much the worst case scenario as far as a combination could go for a quarterback.
Which is it's frustrating for Browns fans, because the roster that has been built is actually very, very good. And maybe the best roster the Browns have had in quite a while over these last couple of years. So to not be able to get the quarterback right is probably insanely frustrating. What did you have as their record? And you had them making the playoffs, correct?
Well, I was going to say, don't forget though, Hunter. The savior, famous Jameis, is waiting in the back. How
could I forget?
So don't sleep on famous Jameis now.
So naive.
No, jokes aside, I had the Browns I did have them making the playoffs. Browns fans, I still got you guys. Had them finishing second in the division at 11-6.
So you got 11-6, 11-6, 11-6.
Funny enough, yeah, no, it is crazy. It's crazy.
It is the best division in football, so.
Yeah, well, really, I had another year of same, on paper. So,
all right, Moving into our last team of the AFC North, we have the Pittsburgh Steelers. I have them at 9-8. I think they are the team that is always the inevitable 9-8. I don't think it matters if you start Russ. I don't think it matters if you start Justin, because whatever Russ is not going to provide, Justin's going to provide. Whatever Justin's not going to provide, Russ is going to provide. I do think this team is going to be a lot better rushing the ball, especially with the upgrades they have to the O-line with Troy Fautanu. They have Zach Frazier. Obviously they have oh my God, why am I blanking on the Georgia tackle they took last year?
Broderick
Jones?
My guy Broderick Jones. I can't be blanking on my guy.
They got Isaac Seumalo as well. But think about this. Think about this, Dobbs. Imagine a jumbo package where Darnell Washington is lining up next to one of your tackles, and Najee Harris is running the ball. You got a 6'8", 300-pound tight end, basically another tackle on the field. Like, there's so much that Arthur Smith is going to be able to do with this offense, and I'm really interested to see if we see more of Najee Harris or we see more of Jalen Warren. I'm leaning because Arthur Smith usually likes the bigger back. Like, you saw how much Tyler Algier played under him, that I'm willing to bet it's Najee Harris. But I do think that if this Ayuk deal doesn't get done, this is recorded on August 14th, and I think he's probably going to end up with the 49ers at this point, just by seeing what I was seeing today. George Pickens, you're one, man. I don't know how much that pass game is going to improve this year. And I think the defense will be what the defense is. But looking at the division, like, let's say they split their division, right? Let's say they win 3 out of their 6 games in their division. They can play Atlanta, they play Denver, they play the Chargers, they play Indianapolis, but then they got the Giants, or not the Giants. Who cares about the Giants? They got the Jets, they have Baltimore, and then they have they have Baltimore, but then they have Philly, KC, and Cincy to finish the year. With being in the toughest division and then playing those teams, I don't see how you get to 10 wins this year.
No, and let me be clear too off the bat. I had to admit, I just had him reverse you. I had him 8-9. I'm sorry, Steelers fans. As far as my simulation,
the under 500. Finally,
Tomlin's record, it might be gone this year, but we know Tomlin. He's probably going to show me up and go 9-8 just to tell me to go fuck myself. That's just typical Tomlin fashion. But jokes aside, look, I think you basically said it all, but let's just, more than anything, I really want to get this point off to Steelers fans, though, because let's start with the positives before you open up into the negatives. As you said, Hunter, you have a young O-line group, mostly young, with hopefully 3 future starters that you just drafted this year. On top of that, I love the point you made about Darnell Washington. Just they have a vision for how they want to go about this team, not only in the short term, but the long term, which is also when you're a fan of the team because you at least have an identity that you're going to build around. The Steelers are going to continue to be building around being a hard nose, as they've always been. Same Steelers. So if you're a Steelers fan, you got to love that you're not changing your identity and that you know what you're going to be building the core of this team going forward. Now we got to go into the negatives because it's only right. Yeah, I have you guys narrowly missing the playoffs. Same old. And what is really, that's kind of the problem with the Steelers, though, Hunter, is at what point does just saying the same old not suffice anymore? But the Steelers are basically, it is the same old minus Russ and Justin. And as you said about Russ and Justin, how much faith do we have that either of them are going to be the starter long term? And I'll say this, I could see Justin sneaking out, has a good year, not even say like a better year than he had on the Bears, and has a career year, but still has some deficiencies, and they kind of hop on the train for another year or two with not a lot of money on the table. I can see a scenario like that. But of Russ or Justin really being like this team's franchise quarterback, I don't see it happening. I think we both just see this as kind of it's just another transition year in the long.
It's like, Dobbs, you got to think of it though. Like, TJ Watt's not getting younger. Cam Hayward's not getting any younger. Like, to me, this is just a bullshit year. Like, neither of these guys are going to lead you to a Super Bowl.
Like, and again, and I always throw it out. It's not impossible. Like but like, do you think Russ?
I'll say it's impossible. It is not happening.
The chances of Justin or Russ having a Nick Foles 2.0 is just It's under 1% chance. It is basically legitimately impossible. And that's the problem is, and Steelers fans, look, realistically, because that's the problem. I can't even say this because I have a Steelers fan who's a homie who I'm super close with. And no matter how bad and how bleak things are, he will never admit that the Steelers are not a Super Bowl contender anymore. So I can't even say that Steelers fans are going to feel this because I know they're not. And that's what I respect about you guys. I respect that you always want to be the top tier. I respect that you guys always want to be, respected and known as competitors. But like Hunter's saying, at what point are you guys going to get real with the times and say, it's been the same thing for half a decade?
Yeah, it's cooked.
And correct me if I'm wrong, it's been more than half a decade at this point, Hunter. I mean, we're moving on 8-9 years plus of the same old. I mean, at what point do you guys want to stop being kind of like how the Knicks were for so long in the NBA? Is that a good comparison? I think like the Carmelo Anthony Knicks and the Steelers right now, same vibe. Like you got some stars, you got some fun stuff going on, and yeah, they could win a playoff game. But is this team going to go win the championship? No. And like we always say, it's just another time I can repeat the slogan here. If you're not first, you're last. And if you want to be in the middling out just to stay you're competitive, I don't relate. And I think that's kind of where the Steelers have got to move past this era they're stuck in.
Any final thoughts on the AFC North before we move into the AFC South?
Final thoughts. To me, they did like you said, they rounded out best division in football, though. So if you're, AFC North fan, you still got that to hang your hat on.
All right, let's move in to the AFC South. I have the Houston Texans at 11-6. I think my biggest thing with the Texans is there was a lot of games where I feel like they should have won, and I could see them actually having like a 12-win season. I just think I want to see year 2 of CJ Stroud and how everything meshes together with all the new additions on offense. So I do think that the Texans will definitely be a good team, and I think they'll be better than last year. I just think the AFC South might be one of the weirder divisions in the league where it's like kind of the opposite of the NFC South. Like the AFC South, like everyone's feisty and can win any week, right? But the Texans, in my opinion, are probably the favorite outside of Jacksonville. Whereas like the NFC South is like everyone kind of stinks. So it's like anyone can win any week, for the most part. So I think my biggest thing with the Texans this year is how many divisional wins are they going to win? They play Chicago week 2. I think they win that game. They play the NFC North, which is a tough division. But then outside of that, they're playing Buffalo, and then they're playing Green Bay. They're playing the Jets. They're playing Dallas. Like, I don't know what Dallas is going to be this year. But then they have Kansas City and Baltimore, two of their last 3 games. So they have a relatively tough schedule. I do think they stand a chance in almost any game this year. I guess you could say a weakness is their cornerback room, but I don't know if there's a big glaring weakness on this team.
No, well, to your point about the corners, especially after seeing that, look, we were a little worried about and not just we. I say we as kind of like an NFL draft evaluating populace, right? Like we were a little worried about where Kamari Lassiter was going to end up rounding out. Kamari Lassiter is already your starting Y corner, which is fantastic for your Texans fans. You don't have to worry about slotting. You don't have to worry about storing him his depth. He's straight out starting on basically every set you're going to have on the field. He is going to be starting on every set you have on the field defensively. So you already have basically not a proven starter, but at least in camp, a guy who's proven he's going to come out and be an effective player on this team this year. And I think really what I need to say about the Texans is just look, well, number one, I had them rounding out at 11-6. So I have them as the, I do have them number 1 in the division at 11-6. I don't want to spoil anything, but I just have to say it off the bat so that the Texans fans aren't sick of me. Maybe that's not enough wins, but 11-6, winning the division. And I think, just to top it all off, like you already said, Hunter, the big problem that I had, why I didn't have them having more wins despite being one of the best rosters in the league, is that, look, schedule is really tough towards the back end of the season. There's some games in there I don't really know how to feel about. And again, back to also just how I did it where I split the division games. I mean, that's already 3 losses right there. So having a tough schedule, splitting division games, it was going to be harder to get them over 11 wins. But bottom line, nonetheless, still a majorly improved roster. on both sides of the ball. Young superstars coming into their own, right? We got Stroud, we got Stingley, right? I mean, we got Nico Collins, Tank Dell. You added Stephon. We've already gone on the whole spiel. I mean, you have guys, Will Anderson, Dean Hunter, you have guys all over. The Texans very much could win the Super Bowl. They're a team that rounded out probably lower in my simulation than they will end up rounding out in real life. And that's really all I have to say on it. It's kind of like they're a prime example of how hard the simulation is, where, yes, you want certain teams to do better, but when you're doing it on paper, sometimes it just doesn't work out that way.
100%. I think that's the biggest thing about the Texans is, like, to be fair in the simulation without, like, cheaping other teams out. I think 11-6 is like a good baseline for them. I think they can finish 10-7. I think they can finish 12-5. I think anywhere between those 3 wins is great for them. Moving in to the Indianapolis Colts. Oh, one last thing on the Texans. We all expect them to take another jump this year. But we don't know how this coaching staff is going to adjust to having tape on them. That's the last thing I'll say. Moving in to the Indianapolis Colts, I had them at 9-8. I think they're a good team, but this is basically like Anthony Richardson's rookie year, and I don't know if he looked all that great in the preseason game. It is preseason, but I need to see it out of A-Rich before I give the Colts their flowers. I think if anyone can do it, Shane Steichen is definitely one of the better play callers and quarterback whisperers in the league, looking at what he did with Jalen Hurts. But with that being said, I think the Colts are a somewhat unproven commodity in terms of, outside of Michael Pittman, you have Adonai Mitchell, Josh Downs, who's currently injured, and Jonathan Taylor, who had an injury last year. So it's kind of like A-Rich's development is, outside of Michael Pittman, kind of placed on these unproven commodities. And I think another thing that doesn't help is they play in a tough division. So while I think they could easily be better than 9-8 and potentially make the playoffs, as they're on the verge last year when they lost to the Texans, it's going to be a big figuring out year of, like, where do we stand in the AFC? I think that's one of the biggest things is, where do we stand in the AFC, and how much more talent do we need to add to be a real competitor?
Okay, and you know what? It's funny. I just got to say right off the bat here. We do. This is the first team I think today that's come up where we actually do have, not significantly, but slightly like different viewpoints on how the season can go. And let me be clear. This is one of those ones where I'm always, I'm up front. This is one of my maybe jackass moments where we could look back on this. This might be, I might be pushing it here. Especially when we get to another team soon. I'm sorry. Again, I only worked with the sheet in front of me, guys. I had, you know what I mean? I didn't know narratives were applied. I did week to week. This is how things ended up for me. And I want to include this too. When it started out, the first 7 weeks, the Colts were 2-5. And I was like, oh God, I was like, the Colts fans are going to kill me. Like, what am I going to do? Like, how am I going to explain this to these Colts fans? But some way, somehow, they ended up at 10-7. Second in the division in that playoff spot.
You're crazy.
So, but let me explain. Right? Other than that, I was just picking the games and it just ended up this way, right? But let me explain how I think it got that way. I looked at a lot of the matchups and I would say to myself that not only would the Colts win a lot of the offensive line matchups, but they also win a lot of defensive line matchups. And you know how I feel about trenches, right? Yeah. This Colts unit has an absolutely loaded trench group on both sides.
I heard Latu's been tearing it up.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say exactly. And Latu's not even right. He could very well be the best guy on the line this year, but they already have a lot of really talented guys. So it bodes incredibly well for the trenches of this team. And let's move on to, okay, look, I'm with you 1,000%. And this is kind of the bottom line for my whole spiel for the Colts this season. Back to the jackass whole spiel is, if Anthony Richardson doesn't make a jump or even regresses somehow, which would really break my heart. But if one of those two happen, the Colts are not going to be 10-7, and this is going to be a terrible take. But I'm banking on that he's going to be able to make enough of a jump, especially, again, I always go back to what I expected him to look like those first few weeks last year before all the injuries started piling up, and what I got I got a much better version of Anthony Richardson than a much more polished version than I thought I was going to get.
I agree.
So that same kind of we can turn over that same wheel to this season, and A Rich can look like a much better version of what I expected again, which sounds hypocritical because I'm expecting what I don't expect. You get what I'm saying. I expect another jump. Let me be clear. And with Shane Steichen. So I think the Shane Steichen, him being able to develop Anthony Richardson, this team has loaded trench units. They have, at this point, I would say a good receiving core, right? Like A.D. Mitchell, Josh Downs, Michael Pittman Jr. I really like what they got going on over there. The DB situation is not bad at all. Like you have all guys that are not like elite, but they're very, very serviceable, if not productive starters. So you're really the most worried about the linebacking core, right? In this 4-3 defense, because there's not really one guy you can point to and be like, yeah, he's a dominant, inside backer. But it's not, to say this disrespectfully, but generally it's not the most important part of the modern defenses, and you can kind of plug and play guys depending on situations and matchups. So all of that to say that if Anthony Richardson has a good year, I really do believe this Colts team can be a playoff team. And that's kind of what I'm banking on.
No, I think so too. I think they have the possibility. So you have them making the playoffs, correct?
I do. And let me be clear. I did not plan it that way. I didn't think it was going to go that way. I thought for sure another team that I'm not going to name yet was going to make it over. But
I think it's definitely possible they make the playoffs. I think that stems a lot on Anthony Richardson's development, and I need to see it a little bit more. I think the biggest thing I'm concerned about too is the shoulder injury. We saw how badly it affected Cam Newton, and I'm not trying to compare the two, but anytime, like even Deshaun Watson with the shoulder injury, anytime a quarterback has a shoulder injury, it concerns me. So overall, I think that's a fair, like anywhere from like 8 to 10 wins for the Colts seems realistic. Let's move in to probably the most confusing team in the NFL. I had them making the playoffs at 10-7. We have the Jacksonville Jaguars. So I like what they did with Brian Thomas Jr. Substituting Calvin Ridley for Gabe Davis. All right, I guess. It is definitely cheaper, for sure.
All right.
Yeah, it's okay, I guess. I do think the defense will take a step. I think the defense will be better this year. I think if Doug Peterson is able to take over play calling like he should have last year from Press Taylor, I think they'll be much better off on offense. I think we're going to see a little bit more of like a vertical attack from the Jags this year, get a little bit more back into that as opposed to horizontal routes and everything like that. A lot of people also forget that Evan Ingram is there, and Evan Ingram has been a very productive tight end for them. I think another thing that we can consider is Tank Bigsby might be a great 1-2 punch this year with ETN. They improve the offensive line. Anton Harrison's in his second year. I think there's just a lot of things that can go right for the Jacksonville Jaguars this year. They do have a relatively tough schedule. Their wins probably come from splitting one with Indy, maybe beating Miami or Buffalo, and then you could beat Chicago. You're going to beat New England. You could beat Minnesota. Tennessee, maybe you get 2 on them, but then you have Las Vegas. So it's a relatively tough schedule. I don't think they have really any cakewalks this year outside of New England.
No, absolutely. And so let's be clear, Jags fans, let's just get straight to the point. Number one, like I got to preface, like I don't preface for most teams, but I'm preface for the Jaguars. This is one of those ones where like really, and that's why I said at the beginning of the whole video, this isn't always going to align with necessarily what I think is going to happen. Which is what's so hard about doing these schedule, right? Doing it week to week. I had you guys somehow, unfortunately, Jags fans, I'm sorry. I had you guys rounding out at 8-9, missing the playoffs. But again, do I think that that's necessarily what's going to happen? I could see, like, hands up, honesty. I can see the Jaguars going and winning 10 to 12 games this year, 100% and making the playoffs. I can totally see that happening. And I actually lean towards that. What's going to happen. I think in the schedule, again, back to, you have to throw some teams a bone here and there. You have to fit some wins in for teams that wouldn't have wins elsewhere. And the Jaguars were kind of just on the brunt end of that, maybe in this schedule simulation, right? Where they kind of got the bad end of some of those games. But even despite all that, this finish is still possible. The -1, right? The finishing to me at 8-9 is still possible. Where look, it's kind of here's if the worst case scenario to happen, I think to me this is what it's going to be. This O-line group, and I know we talked about this on end here for a while now, Hunter. I think a lot of Jags fans are kind of like, I don't know, say like on board with their O-line. But me and you, it's kind of like, yeah, this O-line still needs a fair amount of work, especially when you have a guy like Trevor Lawrence back there. The O-line to me, number one, is just not cutting it yet. I think I'm really, really big on Brian Thomas Jr. long term. I don't know what we're going to get this year. I think we're going to get some splashes, some really good stuff. I don't know. We're just not going to get peak. There's just no way we're going to get peak Brian Thomas Jr. yet. Christian Kirk on the slot, I like that. Over to Gabe Davis, literally week to week. 1 week he's going to give you 100 yards and 7 catches, and 1 week he's going to give you 0 on 4 targets. It's the weirdest anomaly in football. And then on the defensive side, to your point, Hunter, they got a lot. They really did get a lot better, which is why it really does hurt me to have them missing the playoffs and having them have a record that I don't necessarily envision for the season. But again, you know what? You put it on paper, and sometimes it doesn't go the way you want it. It's kind of how it went for me and the Jaguars in this simulation right here. But all in all, I just want to make it crystal clear. The Jaguars still very much are in that competitive range and not just competing for a playoff spot or whatever. The Jags are competing to go win the Super Bowl. Now, is it likely? Still no. But when you have Trevor Lawrence back there and you got Doug Peterson, they've showed us. Look, I'm not going to count them out by any means. All in all, the Jags, like Hunter, you said, they're a confusing team. And that's really just the main way you could slice it.
I think the biggest thing for me with why I have the Jags making the playoffs is, okay, I want to compare them to the Dolphins last year, right? Both competitive teams that had Super Bowl aspirations, and the Jags folded on the back end of the season. But this offseason, I will argue that the Jaguars got not significantly better, but just a notch under it. They add Eric Armstead. They extend Tyson Campbell. They go out and improve the offensive line. They get Brian Thomas Jr. Like, to me, the Jaguars did what they needed to take the steps to become that Super Bowl contender, really. Whereas I don't think the Dolphins did, and that's why I think I'm a little bit higher on them than maybe you are. I think I just believe in what the defense can be this year. I think they could be a pretty special unit, and I think they're pretty underrated.
No. And again, I'm really with you. Like Jags fans, I'm trying to make it as clear as I can. They just got the short end of the stick. They got maybe a few where I had to toss a few teams a bone. That's really, I think, how it ended up rounding out. Let's just end it on this note. Jags fans, I do lean that you guys will be a playoff team, that you guys will figure it out this year. Because as me and Hunter have discussed to extent on previous episodes, if the Jags don't figure it out this year, well, there's going to be a lot of turnover and a lot of things you got to figure out, because another year of mediocrity is not going to be accepted with Trevor Lawrence in the building.
Let's move into our last team of the AFC South. I have the Tennessee Titans at 7-10. This team was weird because their start of the schedule is really, really tough. They start out with they have Chicago. I think that's a 50-50 game. They have the Jets, Green Bay, Miami, Indy, Buffalo, Detroit, and then they get New England, the Chargers, who are not pushovers, Minnesota. Then they have Houston, and then they end the year with Cincinnati, Houston, Jacksonville, and Indy. So very rough schedule. And I think with all the veteran talent that they have on the team, I understand why people may be out on the Titans and why people may be in on the Titans. Like, I'll buy either side of it.
That's the best way to say it, literally.
Yeah, I'm more on the side of I don't see them making the playoffs this year, and that's why I have them at 7-10. But I do think the floor for this team is relatively high with all the vets, and I do think Will Levis is not the worst. I think an offensive-minded head coach can really make this offense effective, and I think they have a good, I don't want to say, they have a pretty decent defense. So I think maybe the floor for this team is going to be 6 wins. I think they might end up like 7-10, 8-9.
No, yeah, I have them. Great minds think alike on this one, bro. I also have them rounding out at 7-10, and it's kind of just, I think you said it best. Like, they could finish slightly better. But I still think all in all, this team would have to really make a crazy push. And more than just this team, Will Levis would have to make an astronomical jump for them to be a playoff team this year. I really do believe, because it's more just, I think for me, I'll say it like this. I come take a look at the defense and I say, okay, wait a minute. This is what scares me a little bit is that, okay, Jamal Adams and Kenneth Murray are both starting on this defense. And you might say, you're saying to me, oh, that's just two spots. That's just two, whatever.
Yeah.
Just two really rough guys to have starting in the year 2024, 2025. And I hate to go at one guy and I hate that, right? These guys they're all professionals. They've earned their keep, but sometimes you got to point out specifics to help people understand where your head's at. And I think for me, it's like when you're starting linebacker, when you're starting safeties, it's very, very, it's rough. And then on top of that, look, do I expect big things from Devondre Sweat? Absolutely. But I think that we could agree on this. If Devondre Sweat doesn't become that guy we think he could, or if he doesn't have a good rookie year, he's a big part of how they play defense.
He went a little bit high, yeah.
Right. He's going to be a big part of this 3-4 centric Titans team where you have to kind of make that work. So there's contingencies on defense that worry me. And then on the offensive side, as you've already talked about, right, you likely have 3 spots of this line filled. But if Skoronski doesn't make a jump and Latham has a really bad freshman, I'm over here playing too much NCAA recently, guys. If JC Latham doesn't have a good rookie season, all of a sudden you're in a position where the O-line's not playing good ball this year, and we need Will Levis to make a jump. I mean, you can put the 2 and 2 together. The bottom line is there's just, as we say about a few teams this year, the Titans are definitely in the top 3. Too many question marks along with the positives for me to say I'm willing to look past the negatives. This is a playoff team. It's just there's just too much questions in the building. There just are.
I think with one more year of rebuilding, they can compete for like a 7th or 6th seed in the playoffs. I just think they're 1 year too early here.
I think I would agree with that 1,000%. Titans fans, it's not slander. It's hope for the future. It's hope for building on the foundation. But this year, it would take a miracle for them to really, really make a push.
All right, let's move in to our last division. We have the AFC West. The Denver Broncos last year finished 8-9. I have them finishing 7-10. It is a tough schedule, and they have one of the worst rosters in the NFL. They have a lot of 50-50 games. For example, they start off the year at Seattle, Pittsburgh, at Tampa Bay. And to me, those are all games where it's like, I don't know. Like, they could finish 9-8. They could also finish 6-11. Like, I don't know if this team can win 10 games, but I do see them having the ability to finish over 500 due to the fact that Sean Payton is the coach. And I do think Bo Nix will actually have a pretty decent rookie year if they're able to establish the run. Obviously, the wide receiver room is a little bit questionable, but overall, I think this team is going to benefit the most from having a coach like Sean Payton, where the roster is not there at all, but because of the ability and pedigree that Sean Payton has, this team will vastly outperform its quality of roster like it did last year.
100%. And my thing is, like, so just to get out of the way, I had them finishing 6-11. If Sean Payton wasn't in my considerations, they would have realistically topped out about 3 wins at most. So like you're saying, Sean Payton being there is more than 50% of what I value as far as this team is concerned. And it's why that I still, despite not necessarily fully seeing the direction, still believe in what the Broncos are doing. And I believe in the rebuild because of Sean Payton, right? And that's not just me saying it as a Saints fan, right? Sean Payton deserved all the praise he got from Saints fans, and he will continue to show Broncos fans why he deserves that praise. But the bottom line is, as we've already harped on for a long time now, when it comes to pure roster, in my humble opinion, the Broncos probably have the worst roster in all of football. But that's back to why Sean Payton is such a valuable commodity, and why that nonetheless this roster can still not compete, but outcompete those other bottom tier teams. So it doesn't. it doesn't change the fact that this team is not ready to compete this year. And, you could even say to an extent, and again, it's not, but they're going to be getting perhaps say, follow me, worse draft picks in terms of worse in terms of quality than they would probably be getting if they had a worse coach in the building right now.
Right.
But you're willing to sacrifice that when you're actually building a culture and you're actually building a winning team and a winning identity. But all that to say that me and Hunter, I guess I don't want to speak for you, but I think you agree with this. Have faith for the Broncos' future.
Yeah,
we just don't know
now.
when it's gonna be like, okay, this roster really turned around. Because it certainly is not today that I can say that this is
reading a ton of dead cap. It's tough.
Yeah, well, exactly. They're still dealing with the Russ debacle, and I like to remind Broncos fans so it doesn't sound like I'm harping on all the negatives. Like you have guys that are young and getting better in the building every day too, right? Like Brandon Jones coming off a good year, Brandon Browning's coming off of a good year, Quinn Miners is coming off a good year. Like you have guys coming off of good years. You have a lot of faith in Bo Nix. But all in all, there are still a lot of holes that need to be filled on this roster. And that's all there is to it. There's certainly no way you can fathom any other reality other than this hole or this roster has holes.
It does, 100%. I think maybe after next year, they could be vying. After this year, they could be vying for a playoff spot. I don't see them any way they make the playoffs this year.
It would need to be a pretty, really productive offseason this year. I'd say for me, I view it more like 2 years down the road. If it were to be next year, it's not impossible, but there'd have to be a lot done this offseason.
All right, moving in to the Kansas City Chiefs. I have them at 11-6, winning the division. They won the Super Bowl last year, and they improved their roster. So, what do you want to talk about here? Every time we get to the Chiefs, it's like, what do we want to talk about?
Let's just make it as short as we can, where Chiefs fans will not feel like that they got cheated. Because I don't want to glaze them over.
That's why I find it hard. Because you guys already know you're the best.
Yeah, they'll agree though. Is that Chiefs fans, we don't need to spend a lot of time on you guys. You guys know where you stand. But let's just sum it up as quickly as possible, right? Number one, funny enough, I actually did have them rounding out at 10-7. But again, as I've already practiced for the other teams, I'm splitting the divisions. I have to toss some teams a bone here and there that if I don't, they're going to finish with way less wins than I do think they're going to finish. I think the Chiefs maybe disbenefit, they kind of got the short end of the stick on that as well. Nonetheless, they still ended up winning the division. They still end up a playoff team. And third of all, the most important thing is we know it doesn't matter what record the Chiefs enter the playoffs with. It's just like the old Patriots. That does not matter. All that matters is that they're going to show up and be ready to go compete for the Lombardi and have the best quarterback on earth. Nothing else is relevant other than that. They're going to make the playoffs. It doesn't matter where they do. They could roll in with 9 wins. Those years where teams show up with 8 wins. The Chiefs could show up with 8 wins if it somehow happened to the playoffs, and I would still think they're going to go in the Super Bowl. This roster got better. They got younger. They extended in very key pieces of the team. That's the bottom line. The bottom line is that the Chiefs are completely on path to be the NFL's first three-peat team, and we could witness history this year.
I do have a little bit of concern for the tackle situation with Kingsley Suamatier and Wanya Morris. I don't know if I feel comfortable with either of them starting right away. I'm not saying it's going to be dire, but that be something I am a little bit concerned about. Hopefully Hollywood Brown comes back healthy week 2, week 3, but that wide receiver room is so fast. And we saw that even if Rashee Rice is suspended and Hollywood Brown isn't back week 1, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It does not matter. So I just think it's going to be very interesting to see what we see out of the Chiefs this year. If they start slow, if they get it rolling fast, I don't really know. Obviously, they got the Chris Jones extension done. So the defense is going to be just as good, if not better. I know that you traded L'Jarius Sneed, but it feels like the Chiefs are on the wave where they're willing to trade players right before they not fall off, but they can get peak value for them, like the Tyreek. Well, you could trade Tyreek Hill whenever, but you know what I'm saying? They traded L'Jarius Sneed where they got peak value for him, and it's going to pay off in the long run.
Yeah. Well, and before we move on to the next team, because I know Chiefs fans will love to hear this, because this is maybe something not a lot they don't hear from a lot of other people yet. Not a lot of people's kind of like woken up to it. But look, here's the best part if you're a Chiefs fan is that not only with the L'Jarius Sneed thing, you got him out right when he's already look. You have won Super Bowls with the man. You got literally the best. You get the best you could have got out of him. Not only that, you didn't just move on from him. You moved Trent McDuffie over to his spot, who's playing like a top 5 corner, and you say, all right, Trent. Now your role's the outside, but here's the best part, and here's the fun part, is that you have Chamari Connor, who only played in total. He moved around a lot. He played around like 400 plus like defensive snaps last year, but 208 at free safety, 145 at slot, 86 just in the box. Kind of like just a little linebacker action. He the point is you play him all over, but now he graded out last year 81 PFF. You're taking him, moving him into the slot, and now you just instantly replaced what you had from Sneed, and you're also bringing in a guy who played really good in the slot already anyways last year. So really, it's not even like anything changed at all if you're the Chiefs, and you know what I mean? You're getting compensation. You've got to love it if you're a Chiefs fan.
Yeah, it must be nice. From 30-0 and another team, sincerely, it must be nice. Moving in to the Las Vegas Raiders, I have them at 5-12. I don't
close.
I don't like the O-line. I like Aiden O'Connell. I think starting Gardner Minshew would be a mistake. I think this defense will play hard, especially with Christian Wilkins there. But where do they get the wins, man? They can beat Carolina. I do think that the Chargers are not going to be an easy team to beat no matter what team you are. And they play them week 1. I see them getting the win versus Carolina, maybe Denver, maybe Pittsburgh, maybe Tampa Bay, maybe New Orleans, maybe Atlanta. Like, they don't have
about that Tampa Bay one.
They don't have like any easy games. And no game is easy in the NFL, but like games where I'm like, oh, yep, they're winning 100% outside of Carolina. So it's like, I don't know, like 5-12 seems right. 6-11 seems right. 7-10 seems like the ceiling.
No, 100%. And again, you know what? And I understand it. I do. They've been in kind of, I don't want to say purgatory, but they've been through a rough sum of years. And Raiders fans are just like we're talking about Steelers fans, right? Like they're passionate. I respect it. You're passionate. You want to be at the top. You want your respect every year. I can't knock you for that. But the reality is, those bottom line is, they're not going to agree or they're not going to reason with what we're saying, but that's okay. Because the reality is that when you have, it goes back to more than anything, this division. You are in a division. I think Raiders fans like to forget that you're in a division with, forget everything else. We're not going to talk about the quarterback situation yet, because I do have a lot of faith in Bo Nix, but we're going to replace Bo Nix with Sean Payton just for today. You're in a division with Sean Payton, Mahomes, and Herbert. There has to be a point where
Sean Payton, Andy Reid, and Jim Harbaugh.
Right. Yeah, we can just make it all coaches, right? We can just we forget the mixing it up. We can just make it all coaches. And you have to say, and I'm glad you said that, because now I can tie another thing I wanted to bring into the whole mix. Where I think if the Raiders even have a year that they round out close to 500, it's going to be very close to what we witnessed just from the Jets last year, like we were just talking about. Because we saw that when Antonio Pierce came and took the reins, this defense was a completely different unit. And I think that this defense plays well enough under him that they can really like win you games just with complementary offense. But it's just like we were saying about the Jets last year. The Raiders basically are just this year's version. How many games is your defense really going to play?
I would argue they have better weapons on offense, but I get what you're saying.
Well, yes, no, 100%. Let me not sell Devontae, right, and the boys and Jacoby short. But you get what I'm saying as far as the perspective of this offense is going to middle out really, really bad, very likely. And if the defense doesn't play absolutely lights out, you're not getting a win that week. And the main thing with that is there hits a point where the defense looks at the offense. They look in the mirror and they say, how much longer am I going to put everything on the line while these fuckers go give 10% and I'm out here, you know what I mean? Right. Giving my all and wrecking my body. That is objectively, it hits a point where that's what happens. And for me, calculating the Raiders wins, that's what it came down to, Hunter. Just like you, it's like, look, it's not that I don't think this team has funny enough, they have a really good number of guys where I'm like, you're picking and you're like, you can build around these guys. You have something going, you have an identity. But the quarterback situation right now, is just not going to cut it in this division. And it's just that simple. Like, if you were in a different division, Raiders fans, the objective, or not the objective, but the storyline, the whole point of how I'd be evaluating the season would be way different. But when you have such a jam-loaded division of quarterbacks and great offensive minds, it affects the way that I have to evaluate you. And that's the bottom line for Raiders fans right now.
You got the worst coach in the division, and that's not shade at Antonio Pierce. It's just the reality with the legendary coaches you have in the division. And you have the worst quarterback in the division. I would argue Bo Nix is probably better than Aiden O'Connell. I mean, let's just say they're tied for third, okay? It's not a good recipe for success. You definitely have a better roster than the Broncos, though. I'll give you that. I will 100%. Give you that.
And back to like we've been saying about, a number of teams here. Raiders fans, we're not sitting here telling you that you're shit and that there's nothing you shouldn't be excited about anything. No. It's far from that. It's more like just don't go all in. Yeah, like don't go all in right now because the future is going to be where it's brightest. Yeah. You're kind of working towards that light at the end of the tunnel with your light right now, and you're going to get there. But you're kind of like halfway through right now, if that makes sense.
So what did you have the Raiders at?
I had them finishing out right around what I have them 6 and 11 is where I had them. So I had them slightly better than you, but we had them rounding out right around that same number.
All right, let's move into our last team of the AFC. We have the Los Angeles Chargers. I had them at 7 and 10. I think a lot of people are underrating them or underrating like what the Jim Harbaugh effect is. I think they're going to be really stout on offense. I think they're going to run the shit out of the ball. They have J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, Kamani Vidal. Let's not forget Justin Herbert plays for the Chargers, one of the better quarterbacks in the league. Now, their skill position is atrocious. They have Ladd McConkey and Josh Palmer. So, not to talk shit on Ladd, and it's nothing like that. It's just...
You just don't think he's going to get to his best his first year. Like, I think that's fair. Like,
think about
you don't think he's going to come in and be an all-pro. Like,
you have your number one corner is going to be guarding Josh Palmer or Ladd McConkey. Like, if Sauce Gardner is guarding Ladd McConkey, or if Trent McDuffie is guarding Ladd McConkey, like, he's not seeing the ball that day. So I guess my thing is they're going to run the shit out of the ball. They're going to be one of the most physical and aggressive teams in the league. They have Greg Roman on offense. The run offense is going to be really nice. They have Joe Alt. They have Rashawn Slater. Their O-line is pretty decent. They retained Khalil Mack. They have Joey Bosa. They have Derwin James. Like, they have pieces on defense. It was just so badly mismanaged by Brandon Staley. The Chargers roster has always been there. It has always been pretty good. It has been the coaching, and that is what they replaced. Obviously, they got rid of Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, so they have to work on, the pass game. But overall, this team is going to be much better and much more stable than it was last year.
No, 1,000%, 1,000%. And I think the biggest thing that I want to say is because you got my gears thinking with this one. This is really, if I was a Chargers fan, this is what I would want to take away from this season. Because to your point, is this team going to be a playoff team? Likely not. But it's all about just like we were just saying with the Raiders, it goes hand in hand. It's about building upon the identity and getting better this year. But I think the biggest thing, if you're a Chargers fan, that would really say, if I was a Chargers fan, I'd say we won this season if this could happen. You know what this is for this team, Hunter? This is having Justin Herbert, despite the skill position just not being where you want them to be, going out and still having a really productive year. Because if he can do that and keep more than anything, keep the turnovers low, you're going to say to yourself as a Chargers fan after this year, no, yeah, like, not that he's already a franchise guy. Like, there's no doubt about that. Justin Herbert's a franchise guy. I would be losing my mind to say he's not a franchise guy. But on top of being a franchise guy, you can look and say, oh man, despite almost any circumstance, like, I really believe Herbert can carry us to the promised land, even if there's holes on this roster. And that's what I think, if you're a Chargers fan, you really want to leave this season with that being your number one takeaway. Like, despite all of the flaws on this offense, if Jay Herbert is still playing that Jay Herbo, as we like to say, that Jay Herbo football, all of a sudden there already was optimism. There's going to be a bundle of optimism if you're a Chargers fan, if that's what happens this year.
Well, I think a big thing too with Justin Herbert is it's going to be, okay, Justin, go get the first down from 3rd and 4, not 3rd and 10, 3rd and 12, right? Like, they're going to run the shit out of the ball. So I think another thing too is you have to look at it in a way of like, Justin Herbert is not going to be asked to do everything. He's not. So I'm excited for what the Chargers can be. I think they're going to be one of the quicker turnarounds in the NFL from a team that was on a downward trajectory because every year was supposed to be the Chargers' year until it wasn't because Staley got 63 put up on him by an interim head coach who's now a head coach. And so I don't know. I mean,
we got to just start calling him the we got to start calling him the South California war criminal. Yeah. We're being a little too nice to the man. That man gave at least 10,000 Chargers fans PTSD for the rest of their life. He's a criminal.
We should have known from the yoga pose on the field
that there was major red flags being thrown out that day, and we didn't pick up on them.
What did you have the record as, Dobbs?
I had Chargers rounding out. Sorry, Chargers fans, but you know what? You actually are probably one of the better teams that was in a rebuilding year. I have them 7-10.
7-10, same as me.
Great minds think alike, though. Yeah, you know what? We ended up same thought.
We will be now moving into the NFC record predictions that we're going to shoot on a different day, but it's all going to be the same video. So thank you guys so much for watching. We're about to get into that right now. Now we're moving in to the NFC. We're back on a different day, a Saturday morning, and we're going to start off with the NFC East. Dobbs, start us off here with the Dallas Cowboys. Where did you have them record-wise, and do they make the playoffs?
Okay, so we got some positives and some negatives for some Cowboys fans here, because I think, I don't think they're going to like the record that much, but they didn't, they're still making the playoffs, so we can't complain that much. I got the Cowboys rounding out at 9-8 on my schedule prediction. And again, Cowboys fans, saying it out loud, right? Honestly, I do think that there's a pretty good chance you guys will finish better than 9-8. But irregardless, making the playoffs and finishing as the playoff team or one of the playoff teams is really all that matters at the end of the day. So, you know what? Going through the schedule predictor, Cowboys schedule, honestly, a lot of games in there that are they're just tough. And when you feel like that the Cowboys have, again, as me and Hunter have kind of alluded to this whole offseason, it's not a big regression, but, back to the all-in thing, and they haven't really built off of last season. And, the whole thing around guys that still need to get paid. I mean, there's a lot of contingencies around the Cowboys right now. I think the bottom line is, though, more than anything else, you didn't improve. And again, this is what we've been saying all offseason. You didn't improve. Meanwhile, or at least significantly, all the other teams in the division, except, despite the fact that the Giants are still doing with Daniel Jones, still upgrading outside of that area. When you're the Cowboys in that division and you didn't make those jumps, that's where these questions are going to come from. But again, still making the playoffs, still a playoff team, but with contingencies around them where I just don't think this team's as strong as they used to be.
I think my main thing with the Cowboys is I also have them 9-8. I have them missing the playoffs, and kind of to go with what you said, they could very easily make the playoffs. But when you look at their schedule, the only wins that I see is maybe NOLA. You have the Giants, obviously, but we know the Cowboys sometimes fold against teams that are basement teams. You're going to play Pittsburgh, but they always put up a tough fight. Atlanta, maybe. Washington. Obviously, you have Washington and the Giants twice. And you play Carolina, but outside of those, I don't see any wins that they're just going to be able to walk in there and dominate. Obviously, from what I've been seeing, like Tyler Guyton's been looking nice, and Cooper Beebe has as well. But I don't doubt that the CeeDee Lamb deal will be worked out before the season. But when you look at that wide receiver room, you look at that running back room, you realize that I have confidence that Mike Zimmer can run a confident defense. But you also did lose Dan Quinn, who was making a lot of that defense. And yes, they fell apart later in the year. But overall, Dallas still has a really talented team. I just think in terms of the fact of what have they been, 12-5 the last 3 years or something like that, with all the changes, with all the contract stuff going on, and the strength of their schedule, they strike me as a team with a little bit more volatility. But I want to say, like, with the Cowboys, their floor is very high, like, for what they're going to be. Like, no way do I see this team below 9 wins. Like, I kind of picked the floor this year for them.
No, I would say I would agree with that 100%. And what I want to go back to that you just said is, and this was what I was going to touch on next. My big thing with the Cowboys is this, and I want to preface it with saying Tyler Guyton, some of the reps that I've seen, right, compared to when you watch him last year, like, you're like, oh man, like they like that progression as we figure. That's what the Cowboys staff does. This is what we said the whole draft process, right? Which is why you wouldn't mind them taking a guy like Tyler Guyton. But from what he looked like last year in college to what he looks like right now, you can see the world of growth he's already going through. You can see the way he's finishing blocks, the way he's staying on his block. Like he looks so much more zoned in and alert to where he needs to be. And it's a great sight if you're a Cowboys fan because he just looks like a different player than last year already, which is awesome. But with that, again, and I want to also say Cooper Beebe, I have plenty of faith, and I think Cooper Beebe is going to be a good pro as well. But the problem is, regardless of all that, they're both rookies this year. And you can't necessarily expect rookies that have a good future to just come in and be cornerstones of that season right from week one and be dominating the opposition because likely as good as their future is, that just isn't what's going to happen. So you're dealing with two rookies on the O-line in a division full of tough D-lines. Number one, so let's just start there. You're facing a really tough D-lines a majority of the year. Okay, I'm not going to we won't put the Commanders in there. But when you face the Eagles and the Giants, you're facing two really good D-lines 4 times a year at that point. So we add that on top of the fact that, like you said, the non-division games are very tough, very hard games. I mean, and there's also a lot of positives for the Cowboys that we could touch on too, like that are also like, oh well, what if positives? Like what if Mozzie Smith makes a big jump this year and all of a sudden this Cowboys D line is consisting of just 4 game wreckers? I mean, that's a possibility as well. There's certainly more positive possibility. Like what if Demarion Overshawn ends up being a terrific transition from safety to linebacker and ends up being a great fit in this scheme? I mean, there's a lot of positive what ifs too. So I want to give Cowboys fans kind of like a little, like we said, we picked the floor more than anything, but this team is still a good team. And this team still has no excuse not to make the playoffs.
Let me ask you this. I think you're going to get the best Dak Prescott that you're going to get because he's in a contract year. But also it feels like Dak could also not have the best year, and regardless, he's going to command $60 million. Do you see, and we don't have to go on this for too long, but do you see Dak Prescott being a Cowboy next year? Because it kind of feels like he's kind of checked out a little. Like, personally, like, with his quotes in the media, like, I'm not saying that, oh, he's done with the Cowboys or anything like that. I'm not trying to be, like yelling, like, this crazy hot take, like, oh, Dak's done with the Cowboys. But I don't know. The vibe I've gotten from just media and how he's talked about it is kind of like, yeah, if they want me here, they're going to pay me like they want me to be here. And, if they don't believe in me, then I'm ready to move on because someone else will pay.
Well, see, you know what? I'm really glad you asked that because I want to answer it with this. I think that Dak deserves to feel that way. And I think, for a lot of quarterbacks, I would maybe really wouldn't understand that angle. But with Dak, I really have to give credit where it's due. Look, when the man came in, literally the year him and Zeke came in, they transformed the Cowboys from a bottom feeder of the league for one season. And again, now it was like a long period of being bad, but a really bad season into, we're back to literally being the kings of the NFC record-wise for the regular season at 13-3. If I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure that's how they finished. Him and Dak and Zeke's first year. And he brought the Cowboys back from the depths in 1 year. And, granted, it wasn't just him, obviously. It was the combination of talent that they brought in. But if you're Dak, you're saying to yourself, obviously, somewhere mentally, when I arrived here, positive things started happening. And on top of that, the Cowboys have been in I think we kind of associate the Cowboys, still a lot of people, especially Cowboys fans, back with the dynasty Cowboys, right? Like super high expectations every year. And if you don't meet those exact expectations, it wasn't right. But the reality is, as we talk about, it's very hard to be the team that wins. It's very hard, right, to be that last team standing. And I think if you're Dak Prescott, you have to feel like, look, I'm doing everything I can to make this team the last team standing. And there hits a point where Jerry Jones has to do his job and also make sure that we have extra guys in the building here and here and here. However, as we always talk about, I also don't necessarily think that the angle he's taking of trying to be the highest paid quarterback is the best thing for the team. That's a whole other can of worms. But the bottom line is what I'm trying to say. I think I can understand Dak's angle of like, I really do deserve to get paid and I do want to be here. But if I'm not here, it's really on them. Like it's their loss. You know what I'm saying? Like I think that's how he views it in his head. Like look, if I'm not here, I'm not going to cry about it because I know that I've brought this team a lot of value.
The morbid, like non-football, I guess, talk is like Jerry Jones isn't going to be alive forever. And if he wants to win another Super Bowl, they really have to do something. And losing a franchise quarterback gets you no closer to a Super Bowl than anything. So, I mean, if they really wanted to get the most out of Dak, I mean, I don't know how much you'd get for him, but if you really are content on not re-signing him, and it seems like the Cowboys are in positions with all their like stars right now where it's like they got scared off of that Zeke deal, so they didn't extend earlier than they need to. But now you have CD, Dak, and Micah all needing extravagant, exorbitant contracts that you're scared to give them. But any other team in the NFL would have just paid these guys already.
And then, and that's part of the problem. I'm glad you said too, because I almost forgot. It's kind of like the Zeke thing is where it all went wrong, right?
Yeah.
But that's where it's funny to me, Hunter, is everyone else, apparently, besides Jerry Jones, had already figured out that the long-term running back thing.
Not the thing.
In his defense, I guess, this was kind of right when it really first started becoming glaring. This was the deal
that killed it all.
This was the one where it started becoming glaringly obvious.
Yeah.
But I think if you were looking at the NFL spectrum as a whole from a good like 20-year period, you would look at the longevity running backs. You did start to say to yourself, okay, like these guys can't be commanding 15 to 20 million a year for much longer. And it's going to hit a point where it's going to become glaringly obvious. And it did literally right after this deal was signed. But the bottom line is still, regardless, when you're the one making those decisions, Jerry's the one making those decisions. You got to be the one ahead of the 8 ball on this shit. Just like how, I got to toot our horn here for a second, Hunter. Just like how we've been ahead of the game for years on how quarterback contracts were not going to be a thing the way they've been for so long. And eventually there's going to be a cap on the contracts. And even now, there's probably still people like, what is this guy talking about? No, stay tuned. It's coming. I promise it's coming. Me and Hunter have been on this for years because you pay attention. You're like, that can't keep happening. A quarterback is not going to be able to get to the point where he's going to demand $80 million a season and that the whole cap's going to the fucking quarterback. But we'll get there eventually. You know what I'm saying? You got to be able to see ahead when you're the one making those decisions, and he didn't. So you can't feel bad for him.
We move into the next topic. Like, I think we'll even start to see that with wide receivers, where it's like, if you're not a number one, you're not getting number one money. Like,
or even just, I'll give you the money, but take it for a year or two and then prove to me that it's worth a refri. Yeah. Like, I'm not just going to give you that money for half of a decade without any contingency on your end.
No. All right. Well, all the rest of the NFC East fans are sick about how much time we spent on the Cowboys. So let's get into a team that is just, I don't know. The New York Giants. I have them at 5-12. You also have them at 5-12. When you look at the Giants, right, it's tough because their schedule isn't necessarily the toughest thing in the world, but even games like New Orleans, even games like Atlanta, even games like Tampa Bay, right? Those teams are better than the Giants. And when you look at sorry, my nose is itching like crazy, man. My allergy, I was out for a walk. My allergies are going crazy.
Oh, but I'm on the same boat with allergies today, bro.
It's just like, okay, we get the Giants have a good D-line, right? Like a good D-line. They have a good D-line. You have Bobby Okereke. Okay, I like him. Their cornerback room and secondary is a problem.
Let's address the elephant in the room. Let's address the real problem with this Giants team is the DB room.
And I think when you look at offense, okay, you're either going to be playing Daniel Jones or Drew Lock. And they're going to be throwing to Malik Neighbors and handing the ball off to Devin Singletary. Like, they had Tyrone Tracy, and he got carted off. He's done for the year.
So sickening.
So it's just like, where is the hope for this team to actually have like a 500 season? We talked about it before, and I've heard other people talk about it. That season where they made the playoffs and won a game was the worst thing possible for their franchise because they got false hope. They thought their team was better than it was, and they've been the same team for the last couple years. The Evan Neal thing didn't work out. You have, their O-line. I mean, yeah, I like Andrew Thomas, but the rest of their O-line is just kind of eh.
I think, okay, I want to start with this is where I want to start because you nailed it. But not only did you nail it on one part, I'm gonna fill in the other part. You said, right, and we already addressed this. When they won that playoff game, it was the worst thing for the Giants. But you know who else was the worst thing for, Hunter? Giants fans. Because Oh no, and Giants fans, look, I want to be clear. Hey, game recognizes game. I've been on the side of it where you know what, you're just desperately unrealistic because you want to have some hope. I respect it. I do. I really respect it. I respect that you ride for your team. That you love the big blue. I respect it. But I've seen these
Go
comments
Big
recently, and
Blue.
they need to be addressed, Hunter, because these Giants fans they're just unrealistic right now. It's just there has to you got to be rooted in reality a little bit here.
You
And the
should really
reality of
want
the
this team to
situation.
stink if you're a Giants fan, honestly.
Well, look, I was going to say realistically, you have to be able to look at this roster and say, okay, look, we're missing crucial O-line pieces. We're missing the quarterback. We're missing a fair chunk of the receiving core. We're missing the entire DB core essentially at this point, right? And not the entire one, but most of, besides what you just filled this year in the draft. And you're saying to yourself, we got a lot of work to do to get this roster to a competitive point, especially when you consider you play in the same division as the Cowboys and the Eagles. And now even I'll say the Commanders, where Jaden Daniels has looked damn good and you don't know what to expect from them over the next few years. So you have to, at some point as a Giants fan, say, it's okay that we're not a playoff team right now. It's okay that we need to do a little bit of building. Because if you want to sit here as a Giants fan and tell me that you think this roster is ready to go compete, I don't know. I genuinely, I actually have no words. I really don't. I don't know how you don't know. I guess you don't know how to evaluate the way your roster is constructed because Giants fans, come on. And again, to Hunter's point, you have a fantastic D line. There are strengths to this team. Like you have a fantastic D line. You have some O line pieces for sure figured out. Like you have Andrew Thomas. You have one of the best O linemen in the league. Right. You have one of the future best receivers in the league, Malik Neighbors. I don't want to make it seem like it's all negative, Giants fans. It certainly isn't. It's actually relatively positive. You're in a time where we already have so many contenders that you're going to be able to rebuild this window for a better time to compete in the near future. But as of right now, let's just keep it real, Hunter. The Giants are not ready to go compete. And Daniel Jones saga is going to be over at the end of this year, and it's going to be a whole new saga to keep your eye on. It's going to be having the new thing that the New York media is going to be all eaten up and what the Giants fans are going to be eating up. And as much as they don't want to hear that, and they want to hold on to the belief that Daniel Jones is going to be the savior somehow at this point, it's not what's going to happen. And this is nothing, there's no negativity about Daniel Jones. Look, Daniel Jones is riding off in the sunset with 160 million. He can do whatever he wants. Daniel Jones doesn't have to play a snap again if he doesn't want to. But the bottom line is this team is not ready to compete. And I don't know why I feel like so many Giants fans feel like this team is ready to compete. It's kind of the whole point of my spiel here.
I guess my thing is like when you look, and we'll get to the Commanders separately, but when you look at the Commanders roster compared to the Washington roster, or the Giants roster compared to Washington, Giants may have more high-end talent, but when you look for a piece-for-piece team, I would take the Commanders roster over the Giants roster in terms of just, the average quality of player, and regardless of age. I mean,
and depth.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a big thing too. Giants don't have a lot of depth.
And I get what they were trying to do with drafting Malik Neighbors, and I don't necessarily think that was the wrong pick. But I think the reasoning for it was wrong. Like, let's get Daniel a weapon and let's solidify this line in free agency. You didn't really solidify. I mean, you definitely made the line better, but it's not anything that Daniel Jones is going to be confident about behind. And Daniel Jones already looked like garbage in a preseason game. And, I used to be kind of the notion that the preseason was kind of useless. But then I started thinking about it. I'm like, but like if your depth is playing bad, then like what happens when a guy goes down during the season? And even your starters played bad. So is preseason really, and I understand it's very vanilla concepts and everything like that, but
no, that's what makes it worse though, Hunter. Yeah. To that point, that's what makes it worse is when you're doing the vanilla stuff, it should be ball in, ball out, simple. I understand how it works. And I just want to say real quick, I'm going to let you finish, but that's why I said to say, that's what's so concerning about it, Hunter, is that it's the starters against the backups. And when the starters are doing the job against the backups, that's even more of a red flag.
Yeah.
It's sounding the alarms.
I think the Giants are inevitably going to go and get a quarterback in the 2025 draft. It's almost like, okay, let's say they're sitting at 6. They could have got McCarthy, Penix, or Nix. I don't know if any of those really would have been a great fit with Dable, but I don't know, is Ewers, Beck, or Sanders? Like, you know what I'm saying? Are they better fits? Like the way, like I think Nix is going to be a good quarterback. I think he's going to be great in Sean Payton's system. But I'll tell you right now, I would have rather had Bo Nix than any of the quarterbacks coming out this year.
See, I'll say this. I'm always fair and honest. The one guy I give my props to right now to this upcoming class. I actually do think Carson Beck has some tools that I really like, where Carson Beck could actually end up being a really good pro. But to your point, I don't know if that Giants offense would be the spot for him regardless. So you know what I mean? And not that it couldn't be either necessarily. I just know, Dable wants his more necessary, probably wants his more mobile guys, and Carson Beck's not necessarily going to fit where I think Dable wants. So
let me also say this. I think another thing with, okay, I understand you let Saquon go. He's your best player, okay? Your best offensive player, let's say. You go out and get Malik Neighbors. You arguably replace like an aging weapon with like a younger weapon, right? My problem, and this is something I feel like not really has been discussed, is your quarterback is already not great, okay? Now, what happens when you cannot establish a run game? They're just going to play the pass. And then you shut down the pass game. You can't move the ball. You're in a situation where it's like Daniel Jones even looks worse. Like, you see teams, like you saw the Texans go out and get Joe Mixon. So CJ Stroud doesn't have all the pressure in the world. You know what I'm saying? Like, you see teams go out and get running backs to take pressure off the quarterback, right? Like, I think there was a big reason that the Colts extended Jonathan Taylor, so all the pressure is not on Anthony Richardson to be getting all the first downs. So when you get rid of that and you bring in Devin Singletary, who I've never really been a fan of, he doesn't even begin to replace Saquon. So it's just a kind of a very tough situation for that offense as well.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And to finish it all off, back to the whole wrap it up with the point of, I've already said, but you're trying to move the ball, passing or throwing behind an O-line. They're just not going to give you all the time in the world, to put it as nicely as possible. And it's Daniel Jones throwing the ball, and you lost Saquon. I mean, pile it all together. That makes a regression sandwich. Yeah. That makes a regression sandwich, Hunter.
I'm not looking forward to it. So sorry, Giants fans. I hope you prove us wrong. I just don't see how. Let's move on to the Philadelphia Eagles. We both have them making the playoffs. Dobbs, you have them at 12-5. I have them at 11-6. I think people are down on the Eagles because of what happened last year. And I think they remedied a lot of the issues. Something that I will say, though, that I do have concern about just personally is, obviously you only know what the media tells you, and like we very well could be wrong about this, but I've heard from multiple people, just like through articles and everything, that like there's not good tension. There's not a good relationship between Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts. And I do feel like if there is a time where things get rough and Hurts is not really on board with Sirianni, I feel like there's a chance that there can be like some public disruption with this team, especially after what they're trying to do, because, they went to the Super Bowl in 22, they lost, and they've been trying to get back there ever since. They were like, 10-1 last year, but I think everyone knew they weren't really like a 10-1 team. So it's tough to see, but I do think that this team, if things don't go right, we could see it go in the other direction. But in terms of talent, like they have all the talent in the world to be one of the best teams in the NFL.
No, absolutely. And, to that point, Hunter, I know that they've been doing a little bit of PR cleanup. They were riding on the cart together at practice. I seen a little bit of, they're trying to, they got in the meeting. They were like, oh, wait, we can't have the media, distracting us with all this talk. But even though deep down, we know that last season we had our disagreements. I think, look, to all those points, you can understand, though, after why last year the two personality types would clash after what had happened, right? Like
Right.
it's totally understandable. I think if you have a good year this year, though, bottom line, you redeem that. You can redeem that relationship and move forward positively for sure. But it all depends. It really does all hinge on this year because if things go south again, there will be major changes, and it will
Yeah.
probably start with Nick Sirianni. But that's all. We're not getting. That's all further speculation that I don't think we have to get into because we both agree that the Eagles are probably going to have a really good year this year. Therefore, Nick Sirianni would stay. So to just break into like why I feel like there's no debate here that you could say that the Eagles are not a contender. The bottom line is this. And you know me, Hunter. We always got to start when a team has two great trench groups. That's always where I'm going to start.
Right.
The Eagles have two great trench groups, so that's the main thing you got to know, right? Like they have two great trench groups, but not only that, you not only have two of the best. We have Jalen Hurts, who's been making leaps every year, and yes, the offense last year held him back tremendously, and it was very hard to watch because it was a huge regression from the Shane Steichen offense. Nonetheless, Jalen Hurts was still playing pretty good ball, right? Still doing his thing and playing injured for a majority of the season. So I give credit where it's due, right? You still got Jalen Hurts. You add Saquon. I mean, we've already gone over this so many times. I also want to say too, because we talked about this before we started recording. Interestingly, starting outside corner, X corner for the Eagles right now on the depth chart, Keely Ringo, quite interesting. But this team is stacked. I mean, they're absolutely stacked. You added Vic Fangio. I mean, you added Vic Fangio
In a city like Philly, like they're gonna love Vic Fangio.
Yeah, just think about this for a second, and NFL fans, if you understand how important it is to have Vic Fangio in the building. Like the Eagles, they added Vic Fangio. Like this is not a little deal. This is like that's a pretty big deal. So it's like I was about to get crazy, but I'll leave it up. We'll see what happens next year. It'll be for the future. All I'm saying is this team is stacked, and if you were to argue that this team is not a contender, because the Eagles is actually just really simple. They're basically loaded everywhere. They don't really have any weak points. They really don't. The one weak point that they had, they absolutely just addressed it full force. They brought back Chauncey. They drafted a bunch of young D-backs with really high upsides that look like they're going to be playing a lot this year. I mean, realistically, Hunter, what even am I going to sit here and say negatively about the Eagles besides the potential negative relationships?
I've been hearing Zach Bond and Devin White have been balling out.
Yeah, and that's the craziest part too. I was saying I didn't even know that I liked where they're playing Zach Bond. I didn't know it. Oh no, go figure. Zach Bond can go play on the interior over in Philly. Apparently, the Saints just didn't know how to unlock him. But it's funny to that point. I mean, yeah. So even that group we were worried about, the linebackers, they look good. Everyone looks good. Where do we start with the negativity? Because there really isn't none for the Eagles.
Fangio, I felt when he was with the Bears, always got the most out of his linebackers. Like I really felt like Danny Trevathan, until he started slowing down, like he was really good for the Bears. Now with that being said, I think I do really also like something we haven't talked about is the Jahan Dotson trade. To get him as your wide receiver 3, I think a change of scenery was kind of needed for him, and to learn from A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. For what they gave up for him was essentially like a 3rd-round pick. Not bad, because they got a 5th back. So it's a 3 and 2 7s for a Jahan and a 5th, which isn't bad. I mean, where is the negativity, Dobbs? I mean, I really think it just has to do with Nick Sirianni, because you have who's the OC? Kellen Moore.
I always want to say
I almost said Keenan Moore.
The last year's, and then I'm like, wait, it's Kellen Moore. Like, how am I forgetting that Kellen Moore? It was the Kellen and Vic. You know what I mean? The whole new reconstruction this year.
I think that is, if you want to talk about negativity, not necessarily has nothing to do with them. More of the fact is we know Sirianni is on the hot seat a little bit and doesn't have the greatest relationship with Jalen Hurts. So if like things aren't going as they're going, you have two guys that could be head coach candidates depending on how, the year goes. So that's something I would be concerned about. The only negativity, and it's not even negativity, but just Cam Jurgens replacing Jason Kelce. Like, Jason Kelce's a Hall of Famer. Like, those are big shoes to fill. And I'm not saying that Cam Jurgens can't do it. I'm just saying, like, Kelce took care of a lot for that offensive line. So it's going to be interesting to see that transition. Also to see if Mekhi Becton, who right now is the starting right guard, can stay healthy. But outside of that, Dobbs, I mean, like, I think Quinyon Mitchell was probably one of the best corners in the draft. Between it was him or Terrion Arnold to me, and to go get him and to go get Cooper DeJean, I think. I mean, their corner room is deep. Like, I do like their corner room. So I don't have much negativity for the Eagles. It's really going to be, are they going to shoot themselves in the foot? And they don't typically do that. Like, that's not their vibe. So I don't know. I mean, there's really not much else to talk about with them outside of just talking in circles about like what could go wrong. Like, there's not a lot on paper that should go wrong.
No, absolutely. And before we close them out, I just wanted to say, because I didn't even realize until just today that Mekhi Becton was now the starting guard on the depth chart. Eagles fans, if he can stay healthy, you guys need to be doing jumping jacks for Howie Roseman. Outside of his just organize assembly appreciation for Howie Roseman. It's getting out of hand.
So let's move in, and there's been a trade, and we'll talk about it when we get to the next division. Let's move in to the Washington Commanders.
I gotta peep this trade.
Yeah, it was the Bears. It's nothing crazy. The Washington Commanders for you, Dobbs, you have them at 5-12. I have them at 4-13. I think with me, I think the Commanders are going to be a team that may find their stride later in the year. They actually start out with a pretty rough schedule. They play Tampa Bay, who I don't think is a pushover. I think a lot of people think that just because Tampa Bay over excelled last year, that they're just going to be like a pushover this year. They're still a very talented team. They play the Giants, which is going to be up in the air, but I still think what scares me against the Giants is the Commanders' O-line is very, very scary to me outside of Sam Cosmi. So I just don't trust them to keep Jaden upright in that game, at least earlier in the season. And then, they play Carolina, but all the teams they play, like literally all the teams they play, besides Arizona, Chicago, and that's it, have like really good D lines. Like their schedule is not ideal for what their skill set is. Now, with that being said, I do think there is a chance that this team could win 6 or 7 games if things go off right. I do think Jaden Daniels is going to make a lot of plays with his legs and make it very hard for teams to defend. I think, we see the issues more with the rushing quarterbacks. And I don't want to call him strictly rusher. Like, he can throw too, but we see it more year 2 when teams get tape on them. With that being said, the floor of the Commanders roster is higher than the Giants, but I do see more more volatility with this team. And I kind of, like we were saying earlier with the Cowboys, I chose the floor, but this team could win 6 or 7 games.
No, I think that's the best way to say it. Like, and again, I think the way I looked at it, and we've talked about this a lot, but you bring Dan Quinn in the building. We see how Dan Quinn maximizes his defense. He maximizes his playmakers. More than anything, he can really maximize having, it's the best way to say this, not necessarily the most talented group of pass rushers. Like, he can still find a way to get the sacks home, right? Find a way to bring pressure where there shouldn't be pressure. That's Dan Quinn's, that's the scheme. And that's exactly what he's going to bring over to this team that's desperately lacking pass rushers right now. And I think, so you just say to yourself, look, this defense is going to be able to win this team a few games. And on top of that, I think Jaden Daniels is going to have a better rookie year than a lot of people think. I've been maybe not like higher on him than a lot of other people, but I've been pretty confident no matter what that, look, Jaden Daniels can really surprise a lot of people this year and kind of carry this team per se, despite they're not going to be very good regardless, but carry them to the point where you're like, okay, like Jaden Daniels is really doing that and this team has a future. That's kind of how I can really picture this year going. But to your point, even if all that does come true, they're not going to be a good team this year, and they're not going to be a playoff team this year, and they're not. It's just about seeing that progress if you're a Commanders fan, and respect to Commanders fans where it's due. I don't think I've seen really many unrealistic Commanders fans. I think that it's pretty, everyone kind of understands the assignment. Like, let's just not be really bad. Let's just see progress, and let's understand that we have a whole new regime in the building so we can make baby steps. And if you're a Commanders fan, I don't really think you can ask for anything more than that this year, because with what you have right now, this roster is half-baked at best. But to that point, there's still a lot of talent on this roster that you can keep around. And there's a lot of it that you have to shut out over the next couple of years and replace. But that's the process. And you now are in that position where you can start the process where you weren't before. So you definitely have made steps, and it's just about continuing to make them this upcoming season.
I think the biggest thing too is I think where my areas of concern are in terms of, like, I think this defense will play a lot better than people think because of Dan Quinn. And my concern though is on the offense, because I like Brian Robinson. I don't mind the Austin Eckler signing, but we talked about the O-line. But now with Jahan Dotson gone, we really have to look at this receiver room where Olamide Zaccheaus is wide receiver too. And I like Terry McLaurin a lot, and I think he's definitely a one in the league. But okay, let's go double Terry McLaurin the whole time. Where do you send the ball? Like, is it going to be a run heavy scheme? And, like, you know, I believe Cliff's run offenses were not bad in Arizona. Am I mistaken? I thought the run offense was decent.
No, the main problem with the Cliffs offense is, just touch real quick. I mean, it was never like they were running the ball really, like, it was more positive than negative. But the problem is, you always remember, is it was so RPO centric, and it was so, right, when teams would start to realize how, right, like the plays that they'd build off of, you build off one play to the other, where it's like, we're shutting everything down that you're building off of, like you have nothing anymore. So that's where it's going to be interesting to see if Cliff has made that adjustment finally, because we saw the story multiple years in a row. First half of the season, no one knows what to do. But once they figure it out, once they start to get the beat on you, that offense falls apart. So it's a good point.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I'm very interested to watch Jaden Daniels. I do think he's going to struggle a little bit more than he did in preseason, as all quarterbacks will. I just think, like, when he audibled that route and sent him on a vertical, I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't know if you do that. I don't know if you can just do that in a regular season game. If you do and you snap, then go ahead. But it could look bad if a safety's watching that, comes down, picks it, and then, you know, maybe there was no safety on the play. All I'm saying is it's going to be different when the regular season hits, and he's probably not going to be able to do that.
No, that's why I want to be clear with, like, every fan base about their rookie. Like, let's be clear. As much as that they might show a lot of flashes this year, don't expect that, unless you're a Bears fan, don't expect them to take you to the playoffs, and don't expect them to be making all pro plays this year. Yes, a lot of these guys I do really believe have very high ceilings, but back to the point of that, Caleb's the only one that I think you're going to truly witness potentially, like, ceiling plays in year one, because there's just a realistic development arc that has to happen with a lot of these other teams. It's just the bottom line.
All right, anything else for the NFC East? I feel like we spent a good amount of time on that.
No, we were cooking for that NFC East. But you know what? The NFC East always drives a lot of discussion. It's such a competitive division. There's always so much you got to talk about. Like, they all tie together so well.
Competitive for two teams?
Yeah, you have to, like, almost tie them all together.
Competing for the top two spots and then competing for the last spot. Let's move into the NFC North. We have the Bears. We both have them making the playoffs. You have them at 10-7. I have them at 9-8. So, give me your spiel on the Bears, and then we'll talk about the trade a little bit. And yeah, I'll let you go with this, because, you know, my takes are, I feel like they're fair, but definitely have some hope inside of them.
Well, but again, you know, I'm the same way, and I'm not a Bears fan. I think, look, I'm just looking at the situation completely objectively, right? You know, I made it clear from day one, the scouting process, the beginning of last year, right? Like, whoever got Caleb Williams was going to have a really amazing future. But not only did you guys, the Bears, be the ones that get Caleb Williams, it ended up being the best case scenario, not only for him, but for you guys. We're like, well, obviously for you guys, but for him too, where, okay, he's not just coming into a solid situation. He's coming into a team that really built a playoff-ready team from week one of his NFL career. And you pile all that together with this just loaded receiving core, his intangible abilities, the fact that this O-line has made a lot of jumps over the last couple of seasons. You guys have really weeded out the weak links, in my opinion. And I think I'm looking at it like this, right? I think of the Bears, because I looked at this season for the Bears. This would be like my ceiling, right? Like, I gave you guys kind of the ceiling outcome of it on the on the schedule. So I want to be crystal clear too. There's also a negative one of this where the Bears end up going 7-10, but they still make a lot of progress, but they don't make the playoffs. But I went with the ceiling one. But let's say I just want to mainly clarify. I think this, and you agree with this. The difference between the Bears making the playoffs this year and not, to me, comes down to one specific thing. And that one thing is mainly just how well that this D-line is going to play. I think you guys are going to win a few games and lose a few games based off this D-line, and it's going to basically be the difference between winning the playoffs making the playoffs, not making the playoffs. Because we know about Montez. Montez is going to make an impact every week, right? But we can agree outside of that. You guys have still definitely have it's kind of just question marks. Like, it's like, who's going to emerge on this D line? And that's just what I need to see from the Bears this year is, okay, either what move is going to be made or who's going to be that real alpha outside. And yeah, I do think that I love Booker. I think Booker has an amazing future. And I think Booker's going to be a really good pro.
He's going to take
But back to my whole rookie year thing. It's just you usually don't, especially with pass rushers, see them really hit that stride first year unless they're an absolute specimen top 5 pick where they're like really, really pro ready at a different level. So I think that, yes, Austin Booker for the future I really like, but I don't know if this year's gonna be able to make that same impact. And just the interior still's a little shaky. So bottom line, the Bears have everything else at this point really figured out. Like I actually really like the DB room. I really like the linebacking core. I like the O-line. I love the receiving core. You gotta love the running back room now with Velus Jones. There's a lot of versatility in there. So I think the bottom line is, with all that, my bottom line, top of the bottom line, is that the D line is the one thing on this team where you have to say, if we have a bad season, it's going to come back to the fact that we didn't get any pressure on almost anybody we played.
Yeah, I think I would agree. Like, my main concern is the D line. I personally am not really concerned about the O line. I'm really not. I mean, I think the O line looked so much worse than it actually was last year because of Justin Fields' sacks. Because he would not get the ball out quick. He would hold it too long. He wouldn't know when to throw it away. And we're seeing the same thing in Pittsburgh, right?
I say, we had to preface, in the preseason, longest time to throw, just had to throw that in.
Next is Caleb. But anyway, it's just, they're for different reasons. Like, Caleb is turning those into touchdowns. Fields is taking sacks. If you take 7 seconds to throw, but you're generating a touchdown, bro, you could sit back there for the whole game. I don't care. But when you're taking plays and turning them into negatives, when a stat I started looking at a lot is the EPA per drop back, and I think Fields was, I want to say, damn near last, and it's just expected points added per every time you drop back, right? And EPA is based on, like, from my understanding, it's how much yardage you gain, right? Like how much you're expected. How many points you're expected that drive based on the result of the play, right? So my thing is, Fields didn't do a great job of that. And what the difference between this Bears O-line and last year Bears O-line is, one, the center position is upgraded, whether that's by a lot or a little, it doesn't matter, it's upgraded. And the depth. The depth of the O-line is so much better than it was last year. And when you have a quarterback that can get the ball out quick, that's able to not drop back too far and set the edges where the tackles don't have to be running for their life trying to stop an edge, you're going to be in a better spot. And I think, we know Poles likes to deal at the trade deadline. I think he's going to be a player for an edge at the deadline. And I think that's when a team could really start cooking. Now, I agree with you where Booker is going to take a while. I think he'll come on. I think they're going to actually give him a lot of snaps right away.
No, I agree with that.
I think they're going to probably start him. If not, he's going to be a heavy rotational piece, I will say. Now, I do like Andrew Billings, and that is really the only area of the team that concerns me. I think we're actually going to see a lot more blitzes from the Bears this year. I think they're going to be a lot more aggressive because they're more confident in this defense. I do like the additions of Shane Waldron and Eric Washington. Like, I think this coaching staff is probably the best it's been in years. And I'm just really excited for the Bears. I think Caleb Williams is going to take some big jumps this year. We've seen it in the preseason. And hopefully Keenan Allen isn't fat and washed like the reports are saying. I think he hasn't played in a preseason game in a long, long time. So I can't imagine he was too thrilled to be playing. But With that being said, I mean, I think, like you said, I think the floor for the Bears team this year is like 8 wins. Like, they really need to have 8 wins. I would say if you're a Bears fan, I think Bears fans are expecting them to make the 7th seed of the playoffs. Like, to us, I think Bears fans for this season to be a win, sneak into the last seed of the playoffs, and I think you are seeing the progress that you're expecting from this quality of roster and this level of coaching staff.
No, absolutely. That's the best way to put it. I mean, it really is, because the bottom line is
and be a 7th seed and beat the Packers once. You have to beat the Packers once.
That's actually the most important contingency. Even if they miss the playoffs by 1 game and they just beat the Packers once this year, I'm not even trying to say it's not like on some funny like Bears meme stuff. Like, that actually would be a great
it's
like
a turn of the tide. Yeah, turn of the tide. Yeah.
Yeah,
that
like, you know what I mean?
All right. Any last thoughts on the Bears?
None other than, you know, we got the flu's juice was tricking us at first. There was the recipe was fucked up, Hunter. It was fucked up. I think the flu's juice is finally ready to be shipped out the factory. I think this year we're not being bamboozled. We're not selling sham products.
Yeah.
I think for the first time I feel good about the product that we're shipping out.
The flu's juice was snake oil last year.
Yeah, the ingredients weren't right. We finally got the concoction good. I think that start sipping that flu's juice, Bears fans. This year I think it's gonna go down. It's gonna go down fine.
All right, let's move into the Detroit Lions. You have them at 12-5, winning the division. I have them at 11-6.
I think so. We could start by saying number one, right? The Lions, and I think you agree 100% for yours too. Yes, I had them at 12-5. You had them. You said it with 10 wins, right?
11-6.
11. Okay, I think we can both agree they could actually end up even with somehow, some way, a better record than that. Like, honestly, this team is so stacked that I really could see the Lions like having one of those seasons where you're like, God damn, like, you know, they only lost 2 or 3 games. Like, I mean, this team, they're absolutely.
I wouldn't be surprised if they went 15-2.
No, that's why.
It's just they have a hard schedule.
I'm glad you said it. I'm glad you said it because no, exactly. When you look at this team's schedule, it's like, yeah, they should be able to go handle business most weeks. Like, they really should. And even if there's a team you're not so sure about, you got to remember that this is not the same old Lions.
Their schedule's actually not that bad.
Like, this is a scrappy, tough. Like, this Lions team is just, and I think my main thing
17-0.
My main thing about the Lions this year, Hunter, is like we saw, and it was already a thing last year, but this Lions team's kind of playing with. I'm trying to think of the right way to what the right verbiage for this is, but because everyone's playing, they're all playing with the same passion, they're all playing with the same fuel. I'm not trying to take that away from you, but the Lions have that extra gear of like, you know, the city's finally like really behind us. We really feel like we're really finally turning a 50-year-old identity around. We were so close last year to doing something special. You have to feel like the Lions are going to come out really pissed off and ready to go handle business this year. Like, I think there's a little bit of an X factor on top of the fact that they're already a really talented roster. And I always like to include intangibles because, yeah, you could sit here and dismiss it as bullshit. But I think regarding human emotions and psychology into this type of stuff, it's real stuff. And if you're looking at it from that perspective, you got to be saying to yourself, the Lions know that if they just go out and handle business this year, they have the team to get the job done. I mean, if they're locked in, this team could potentially not be stopped by anybody. And they're loaded.
Well, I mean, I think if you look at it, Dobbs, like, but beyond the San Francisco 49ers and maybe the Chiefs, not even, like, who has a better roster than the Detroit Lions? They have, in my opinion, the best line in football, have one of the best running back rooms, top 10 quarterback. They improved the secondary greatly, but if you look at the 49ers secondary, I would argue the Lions is better. Then you go into the linebacker room. You have guys playing their ass off. Now, do I love Marcus Davenport as their other starting edge? No. But, like, that's what you're arguing with. Your edge, too. So, if you're the Lions and you want to be a contender and you want to go trade a second-round pick at the deadline for an edge, you probably have the best roster in football. And I think Dan Campbell is probably going to really hammer home that if we want to get this done with this current core of roster, it probably has to be this year. And I think he really made that a point last year when they lost. And honestly, they should have won. And yeah, I don't know. I think the Lions are poised to make another Super Bowl run. Now, funny enough, I actually don't have them winning the division. And we'll get to that later. But I just think when you look at their running back room, when you look at their wide receiver, I mean, if Jameson Williams is able to take another step, this wide receiver room is going to be crazy. And I also wouldn't be surprised if they go try to grab a wide receiver at the trade deadline as well, or an edge. Like, I think wide receiver or edge is getting acquired at the deadline.
Wow, I'm with you 100% on that. And to that point, that's really all this team is missing. But as we know, no matter what, if you're a team that wins a Super Bowl, you could always point to something that's missing from any team, right? There's never a fully, they were a perfect team.
Right.
So even if those two things don't happen, or one of those two things don't happen, this Lions team is still ready to go compete for the Lombardi. And if you're a Lions fan, you got to feel damn good about that.
Let's move into the Green Bay Packers, my division winner. I have them at 12-5. You have them at 10-7. I just think this Packers team got better in the offseason. I do believe in the Jordan Love hype. I think we both do. I want to say that, like, I don't like when they say, I think their wide receiver room is very deep with talent. I agree with that. But I also don't like the idea of banking on a ton of guys that wouldn't be a wide receiver one in a lot of rooms, right? And we know Jordan Love and Matt LaFleur are great for scheming people open and getting everything like that. And I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying I feel like a lot of Packers fans have a ton of stock in their wide receiver room. And to me, that's just like, I don't know if that's what you want to put your stock in, right? Like, they don't have like a single proven player in there. With that being said, I do think their O-line it's not awful, it's not great, but it's going to take some time, I feel like, to gel a little bit, especially with, Jordan Morgan in there. He's playing guard. Rasheed Walker, I've heard, has been doing pretty decent at left tackle. So it's going to be interesting. He was their 7th round pick, not last year, the year before, I think. But I don't know. I mean, I feel like this defense is going to be really good, especially with the addition of Xavier McKinney. They drafted so many safeties. Looks like Javon Bullard's going to start. He was a draft pick for them, I believe, in the 3rd or 4th round this year. 3rd, 4th, or 5th. I can't remember. But, I mean, their D-line is good. Their linebackers are good. Jordan Love is obviously great. They signed Josh Jacobs. Like, with what they did last year, I think they got hot at the right time. But I do think they're so young that they can take a step and be one of the best teams in the NFL this year.
No, and absolutely. And you even remember, if I'm picking my prediction for NFL MVP, I've already said I'm probably going Jordan Love this year, right? Like for narrative reasons, for like,
because they're not there with like, okay, I'm just trying to pick like an average quarterback. They're not there with Derek Carr last year.
Absolutely not. No, they're not there with a majority. That's the thing is, you could even take a better QB than Derek. They're not there with a lot of QBs in the league last year, which is why Jordan Love really needs to start getting his respect. And I think he kind of is. It's coming along. People still are getting used to the fact that Jordan Love is going to be one of those, one of the true ones. But people are warming up to it, and it's becoming a reality. But outside of just that, just the Packers in general. Look, and I want to be clear to Packers fans, as I have for some of these teams, where I got to clarify. Yes, in the schedule, I had you guys rounding out at 10-7, but in reality, could this team win 12 to 13 games? Absolutely. If anything, kind of just like how I maybe took the ceiling with some other teams. Well, maybe in this case, I ended up just kind of rounding out the floor on the Packers. Now, not that I did it on purpose. I didn't do ceilings or floors on purpose. Just how I ended up rounding out the way that I did my predictions. But bottom line is, if this is the Packers floor, which pretty much relatively I think it is, right? Like 9-10 wins would be like the floor this year. The ceiling is 12, 13. I don't think 14, but you get my point. This team could finish near the 1 seed, if not the 1 seed in the NFC. Super talented roster, getting better, young. This core on offense is just, they're young and gelling together. Like, they're all on the same page. They can relate to each other. The running back room has got a lot of nice. It's very fluid now, right? I've got a nice like combination of guys with Josh Jacobs and Lloyd. They complement each other incredibly well because they're so unlike each other. There's a lot of things to like about the Packers, and like you said too, I mean, you got Xavier McKinney, one of the best free agents last year, a huge addition. I mean, this Packers team is ready to go compete with anybody realistically, especially when Matt LaFleur is the one calling the plays.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing I was going to say along with that is the coaching is just so top tier that it's like they can elevate really whatever they have. Let's move in to our last team of the NFC North. We have the Minnesota Vikings. You have them at 4-13. I have them at 6-11. Why do you have them so low, Dobbs?
All right, and so look, let's just because I already like you said, we can already hear it. I can hear them already. The Vikings fans in the comments, they're losing their shit on her.
Hold on. And I know, I just want to say this. I know it was an injury, and I know none of us can control it. But I was told J.J. McCarthy was going to have the best year of all rookies by people on our Vikings team preview. He had 188 yards and 2 touchdowns. So, I mean, I'm not victory lapping an injury, but it's just like, I think the Vikings fans are sometimes a little too optimistic about like how good the team is going to be this year.
Well, I'm going to say this. I'm not even going to relate it to the injury at all, because whether he was injured or not, here's what I want to say. I think the to your point, I saw way too many, and this is where I know that people don't watch football schematically. A lot of times they're just watching it. You got to watch schematically, guys, because there's so many comments. I saw the same comments as you did. And I'm not even just talking about on our content. I'm talking about on like just NFL based content, Reddit, whatever. A lot of Vikings fans are like, you guys are gassing Caleb with these yada yadas. Well, look at the numbers that JJ put up. And you're like, okay, yes, let's look at the numbers JJ put up, but let's crunch the film of what JJ did. Let's acknowledge that against the first team, he threw a really late ball that got picked by a starter. And then let's acknowledge, and this is someone, let's be clear, Hunter, you back me up on this. I'm someone that's been a JJ truther who says that he has the potential to have a really, really good
you've been the
career.
main one, to be honest, in our chat.
We're like, I'm honest. Like, I think Vikings fans, I think JJ McCarthy can have a really good future. But with that being said, the fact that you guys wanted to act like his debut was better than Caleb, he showed more flashes, et cetera, we're not doing that. And this goes back to why, yes, numbers mean something, but they do not mean everything when you're watching exactly how it happened. And play for play, and you're watching from the above and the all 22. Yes, JJ McCarthy has a good future, but let's not jump the gun acting like he's done anything incredibly special, whether he was injured or not. Right? And that's the bottom line. Like, and yes, I want to add this, Vikings fans, I hope for a speedy recovery. I want to see you guys be able to have your future guy in there. Despite the rivalry that we share, Saints and Vikings, I want to see you guys have your guy out there. But don't get ahead of yourself, because it looks bad when you're getting ahead of yourself.
It's also like, I think a lot of people are just chalking up to the fact of like, Sam Darnold's going to have a good year. We don't know that.
Well, that's where I wanted to get into this next, because you said your initial question before I got off my tangent, like, how do I have them so low at 4-13? Well, Vikings fans, look, last year you finished 7-10 and you had Kirk Cousins balling out.
Well, for how many weeks? 10 weeks, right? I think.
Yeah, I'll say for 10 weeks. And look, and yes, and that. So I want to tie all of it together. When Kirk wasn't there, we saw that the team struggles. Like, this is not the same Vikings team without Kirk. With Kirk, they still weren't like that. In my opinion, a team that you were afraid to see last year. And I think you just look. I break it down as simply as possible, right? We come down to the depth chart, and here's what I see. I see a team with a really good tackle situation with a pretty mid-interior situation. And then, I'm going to get last on the final point, because you're going to laugh at the final one. But, like, you'll see what I'm all tying into here. We have an interesting receiving core, where now Jordan Addison's been kind of dealing with injuries and whatever. Jordan Addison's kind of in an interesting spot, even though I do believe he's very talented when he's out there. We know who Justin Jefferson is, right? We don't have to go into this. He's the receiver of our generation. But then outside of that, we're at a point now where just yesterday, Jalen Naylor was named wide receiver 3. So already we're getting into territory we don't necessarily know what to expect. And then you add that on top of the whole O-line situation. Yeah, look, Aaron Jones is super talented when he's out there, but Aaron Jones is getting older. You never know what to expect with running backs that have hit the point of volatility. And we come over to the D-line. I think Dallas Turner's going to have a fantastic career. But back to rookie D lineman, you never really can hit your ceiling year one. So Jonathan Grenard and Dallas Turner are going to, in my opinion, have a really good future together. But this year specifically, I think Grenard's going to be the one carrying a little bit more of that burden because Turner's still growing into his own. The DB situation is average, and the linebacking core, I will give credit where it's due. The Vikings
I
do
think
have
that's
one of the
their
best.
best unit on defense.
They have a really, really, really good linebacking core, a really good young linebacking core. But outside of that, to tie it all together, you moved on from Kirk Cousins to Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold has never showed us, even in a Niners uniform, like that he's going to be a game changer for you. And I think if you can see it in a Niners uniform with arguably the most loaded roster in football, and then you bring him over to the Vikings, who's a middle line roster right now, you do the math in your head and you say, how is Sam Darnold going to elevate this team? And if he doesn't elevate them, there's going to be a regression. And that regression could very well be a 3-win regression where, yes, it looks really bad this year, but the first round pick you just spent is rehabbing all year. I mean, I don't think it's that unfair of an assessment. Like, well, yeah, exactly. One of them. Your main offensive changing, right? Franchise revolving. So it's like, I don't think that it sounds bad and it sounds like I'm hating. But from an objective standpoint, how are the Vikings going to have a good year this year? I think is just kind of what it comes down to for me. Like,
well, I think a big thing with McCarthy was development, and he's not going to be able to practice. Like, that's a big thing. And I don't know if I'm all the way with you on the Aaron Jones thing. I think last year we saw the regression more because of the injury, and when he was not injured, he was explosive. But with that being said, it was a hamstring injury, and we know hamstrings linger. Like, once you get the hamstring for the year, like, you're not healthy. You're just, like, feeling good enough to play. Now, with that being said, I mean, I do think their corner room, I know they signed Gilmore, but I'm still really concerned about it because the Vikings, I want to say, were the first. They had the most blitzes percentage of any team last year. I think they blitzed on 53% of plays. Well, I know that's. Here's my thing. I don't know if they're getting the same push without Danielle Hunter. Because think about it. Jonathan Grenard played really good last year, but he was opposite of Will Anderson. If you look at the team, like Jerry Tillery and Jonathan Grenard are your edges. So I don't think the Vikings are going to be horrible on defense, but I do think Stephon Gilmore has kind of lost a step. I still think he can be there at the beginning of the season, but week 10, week 11, week 12, is he still going to have that speed, to keep up with these wide receiver ones? So I do think that the Vikings would benefit from actually having a pretty bad year because then they can go get one of the top talents in the draft in a year where you have 3 other people in your division that are going to be much better roster-wise than you.
Yeah, and you know what, Hunter, to that point, I think that's kind of like what subconsciously went into my scheduled choices for them. Is I'm like, look, if I don't really think that they're going to pull out this game, I'm giving them a loss because there's so many things going against them. Like literally, they subconsciously, that whole team knows now, like deep down, we need assets, and the best way to get assets is from having early picks. I mean, it's a hard reality, but it's a reality.
I think it was pretty funny too, like that practice. The Browns were, I guess, picking Sam Darnold apart on offense. So it's gonna be an interesting year for the Minnesota Vikings. Let's move in to the NFC South. We have the Atlanta Falcons. You have them at 10-7. I have them at 9-8. We both have them winning the division and making the playoffs, obviously. Why do you have them 10-7? Why do you think that they are going to be a double-digit win team?
Okay. Well, how about I preface with this? Because, my Saints brothers and sisters out there, they're probably pretty hurt to hear that I would have the Falcons, winning the division. But let's be objective here, guys. The Saints, I've seen too many Saints fans that are on the same trend as a lot of other teams now, where we just want to be unrealistic to be unrealistic. I don't like that. Okay, let's be realistic for a second. The Falcons have two amazing trench groups. So let's just start there. Back to right when you got two.
Do you think their defensive line is amazing?
How about this? I won't say that that's amazing. I'm not gonna say amazing. What I'll say is this: 4 productive starters. Let me rephrase. You have 4 productive starters on that unit. And I think, so you have 4 productive starters on your D-line. You have 5 productive starters on your O-line. And then we go to the skill positions. And yes, that's when things do get a little concerning on offense. You're like, okay, I truly you don't know how to feel necessarily all the way about skill positions on offense. But I think I look at it from this perspective. I've never been out on Kyle Pitts. I've never even lost faith at all in Kyle Pitts. I think Kyle Pitts is still ready to be fully unlocked. So I look at Kyle Pitts like you got an absolute weapon over here at tight end. Drake London, same concept. I think Drake London's still waiting to be fully unlocked. Yeah, outside of that, it's not the greatest situation ever, but you still have guys that are ready to come in and, show that they get, Ray McLeod is interesting in the slot, and then Darnell Mooney on the outside. It's interesting, but it's not like I wouldn't say it's terrible by any means. You still have interesting, and then, right, just everything we already know. Kirk Cousins, Bijan Robinson, I think is going to make a humongous jump this year. We already talked about the D line, the DBs. It's not the greatest unit, but the upside of it is very high with AJ Terrell, Jesse Bates. I mean, and they added Justin Simmons. There's a lot of upside in this team. And I think the bottom line is just, as far as the NFC South goes, the Falcons are the best roster in the NFC South. And if you can't admit that, no matter what team you're a fan of, then you enjoy lying to yourself. Now, me, for one, I don't enjoy lying to myself, and be honest. As much as they're a rival, it doesn't matter. The Falcons, they're the best team in the division on paper this year, and they finally have put a roster together that is fully capable of making the playoffs. And Falcons fans would agree. If they don't get the job done this year, Hunter, even though it's a whole new staff and everything else, questions have got to be asked because this team is too good not to put together a playoff appearance in the NFC South.
So I agree with you. I think they'll win the NFC South, but in my opinion, I'm more confident about the Bucs. And now I have the Bucs with the worst record. Because like you said, I think the key word is, on paper, this team should win the NFC South. Kirk Cousins, 38, 39 years old, coming off an Achilles tear. We know Kyle Pitts was dealing with the knee injury. Bijan Robinson, I think, will probably have 2,000 scrimmage yards this year between from the ground and the pass game. Because what you said about the offensive trenches, they are one of the best O-lines in football. Like I'll agree with you on that. Now, I will say with Rondale Moore going down and Ray McLeod being your wide receiver 3, that does concern me. And we haven't seen Darnell Mooney be the most productive wide receiver in a couple years now. Now, I do think that has to do with the offense that was being run in Chicago. I do think he still has some juice, but we don't know. I think wide receiver 2 is obviously a better position for him than wide receiver 1, especially with Drake London there. So I do like the Judon trade. I do think 3 was a little rich, personally, especially because he's coming, and this is a good point, that it was a torn bicep. It wasn't like a lower body thing. So it's like he's still going to have that explosiveness. But yeah, this is just one of those teams where, like you said, I know it's a new coaching staff, and I know, okay, this is really going to be what's going to be tough for the Falcons. If Kirk Cousins does not play well, you got the number 8 overall pick sitting on the bench. I do not envy Falcons fans right now. I'll tell you, it is going to be a brutal talking point this year if Kirk Cousins does not play well.
Well, and I want to just, because I know we're going to get to them soon, so I'm going to hold off most of the discussion. But I'm telling you, because this is fans are crazy, Hunter. Like if fans are already doing that with Spencer Rattler, and I'm gonna say, like, I want to believe in the future, and I want to Spencer Rattler to end up being a good QB. But too many fans, Hunter, I'm sorry. They just what is going on up here, guys? Like you can't just because you want something to be the case, you can't just force a functioning starter out the building for somebody that has minimal NFL experience. Like, it just doesn't work like that, and it's like you see how quickly everyone is just ready always, Hunter, to let's just turn around. Just throw the backup in. Throw the belt. See what he's got. Guys, there's a reason that they're the backup. Like, these coaches are watching it every day at practice. Like, if your guy was putting that shit on every practice, he would be the starter. Like, you know what I'm saying? And I get it. But I think the point I'm trying to make here is, like, fans as the NFL populace, like, we got to stop this whole, like, just throw it. Just throw. Everybody's living in this fantasy Tom Brady land that their backup is some untapped legend. It's like, guys, like, and yes, I get with Penix, there's a little bit of a contingency where you maybe earned that right to be a little bit more excited for him than a normal backup, right? But the bottom line that I'm trying to make is this coaching staff's watching these guys every week, and they're going to put in the guy that they have the most faith is going to bring home the win that week. And as a fan, you kind of just have to be able to accept that and say, I'm not at practice and I'm not seeing the positives and the negatives. And for me to be demanding depth chart changes off of a couple mistakes, it's just it comes off rather casual in the nicest way possible.
Yeah. Well, we'll see if the Falcons can do it. I mean, I feel like they have to win this division, and I feel like they almost have to win a playoff game.
Oh,
like,
no.
I feel like if they lose a playoff game, it's kind of a disappointment of a season. Like, because
Falcons fans would agree.
I think the biggest thing is we know this team shouldn't have been 7-10 the last 3 years. Like, we know it. We know it.
That man, Art Smith, he was cooking for everybody else in that NFC South.
Yeah, I don't know. Such a frustrating team to watch. Let's go to the next team. We have the Carolina Panthers. You have them at 5-12. I have them at 3-14. I do think that the Panthers got better this offseason. I do. I think bringing in A'Shaun Robinson, bringing in Damian Lewis, bringing in Robert Hunt, they really invested in the interiors of the lines. Jadeveon Clowney, I don't know why I was slurring over that. I do think is a good addition, but he's gotten better, which is weird. He's actually gotten a lot more polished and better with age. I do still have concerns about the wide receiver room and their tackle situation. Like, we need to see Ike Ekwonu really step up to what he was his rookie year. Like, because if he doesn't, then you start saying, okay, we have a left tackle problem. And Bryce Young is not the biggest guy in the world, and like if you have a massive edge coming in hitting him multiple times throughout the season, I don't know how long he can stay healthy. You really need Jonathan Brooks to come back like what he's supposed to be. They invested a lot in the offense by going and getting Jatavion Sanders as well and Xavier Legette. Like they really tried to build around Bryce Young. I think I like the idea of going and getting Deontay Johnson. I like Adam Thielen. And in theory, I do like this receiving group for what it is. Like, for how little it's been invested. You know what I'm saying? Like, I do like the offensive skill group for what was invested in it, right? Let's just say that. I don't know if this group is necessarily going to take Bryce Young over the edge, though. I think that's going to be a lot on Dave Canales to prove that he can raise the ceiling of this team.
Well, 100%. And I think, look, I had them making slight improvement, but I think Panthers fans would agree too. Look, they're probably a little bit more optimistic than us, hoping for, let's say, a number like 7 or 8 wins. And let's be clear. If they were to ceiling out and have a miraculous season, I do believe that it's possible for them to hit that kind of number. I do. I mean, if this defense can play super complementary, super tight, and this offense can just minimize the turnovers, and the O-line can just do anything compared to what it did last year. Look, this team they really do have some pieces, right? And especially when you would agree with this, when you take a look at their roster and their starters more than anything, let's disregard depth for a sec. When you look at the starters across the board, compared to even some other teams that we have much better than them, you're saying to yourself, like, they have like pieces across the board where
right.
I understand what they're trying to do. And I agree with the direction of that. We say that a lot about the Panthers. Like, it's about, I 100% like agree with the vision. It's just the bottom line has been the whole offseason. The direction's right, but it doesn't mean that you're going to arrive at the destination at the end of this year. Like, end of the destination is probably multiple seasons down the road, if that, but you're at least headed in that direction.
This to me is effectively year 1 of the rebuild. Like, you could consider, I think last year was year 0 because you were playing with like zero assets. So with that being said, I mean, I think this team is far away. The biggest thing is Bryce Young needs to show that he can be your franchise quarterback.
No, Bryce Young needs to show you can be the franchise quarterback. I think, and to add even just a couple other things onto that, I think, one thing that would be a huge jump for the Panthers this year, you say, can JC Horn, can you please just
stay healthy?
Just stay healthy for us this year? Like, because what I wanted to add in, to kind of top off the Panthers in this case is if JC Horn has another one of those years, which has basically been every year, where when he's out there, he's quite literally one of the best corners in football, but when he's not for most of the season, this cornerback room, I don't want to say it's desolate, but it's about as close to being desolate as you could be in the most respectful way possible.
Give me a percentage on how many games you think he's played out of all in his career, out of the total season.
Okay, do you have the number in front of you?
I know what the percentage is.
Okay, I'm going to guess that he has played 17%.
Okay, it's a little high. It's 43, but it's
I would have thought it was. I really would have thought it was less. I really would have thought it was like 20. Like
it's just like when he was your first round pick in 2021. He's going into year 4. Like this is extension year, so like you really got to decide what you're gonna do with him. But overall, I mean, I think we came to the same sentiment, Dobbs, and we have for a while. Is that the Panthers just need to understand that this is really year 1 because it could have been last year. If they didn't, I hate to say it, but like, didn't hire Frank. I don't hate to say it. Didn't have Frank Reich as their head coach. You know what I'm saying? Like, it could have been year 1 if they would have just not hired Frank Reich. But at the end of the day, I mean, the Panthers fans for right now, I think Dan Morgan and Dave Canales are a much better combo than Scott Fitterer and Frank Reich.
Yeah, there's no debate about that, at least currently. I don't think that they'd have to really
sell me.
They'd have to go
yeah,
downward spiral.
They'd have to slip a couple 100,000 for me to say that. Let's move into the New Orleans Saints. You have them at 9-8. I have them at 7-10. So I guess my thing, Dobbs, when I look at the Saints, I'm not like one of these Derek Carr haters. I think he went through for 4,000 yards last year. Like he's not bad, right? And you have Alvin Kamara. You have, a all right receiving room with a star like Chris Olave. But when you get to that O-line, it is bad. It is bad. And another thing that I want to talk about is outside of Olave, all your stars are aging. And the cap situation isn't great. So it's just like, I think the floor is relatively high for this team. But I don't see, unless the offense really gets in a groove early, which is a new OC, so I don't know if that's going to be the case, how they win 10 games. I don't see how they touch double-digit wins unless they start out like that.
No, well, again, look, as a Saints fan, I'm going to tell you straight up, you're spot on. And any Saints fan that's not lying to themselves is going to tell you, look, this hurts. We probably have the worst O-line in football right now. And look, I look where it's due, credit where it's due. Talise Fuaga could end up being a fantastic pro, and he could end up having a great career for us, which I do believe he's going to do. And to add, I think Eric McCoy is a really, really good starter, and he's one of the best centers in all of football. But irregardless of the two things I just stated, Talise Fuaga is a rookie, and you can only expect so much from a rookie. On top of that, everywhere else, Lucas Patrick is our starting guard. Cesar Ruiz is our starting right guard. They both have had, I'm just going to say it, they've had dismal starts to their career, right? I mean, I'm just going to keep, especially for the fact that Cesar Ruiz was a first-round pick for us. Love his story. Think he's a good dude. But I'm going to be honest for a second. Cesar Ruiz has not moved the needle in the slightest since we spent a draft pick on him. And then let's just move over to Trevor Penning, where it gets even worse. We spent an even earlier pick on Trevor Penning. If I'm not mistaken, we did. We spent an even earlier first round pick on Trevor Penning, and it's actually gone somehow much worse than Cesar Ruiz. So much worse than Cesar Ruiz. Trevor Penning genuinely looks like the worst tackle in football on tape, and he's a starter.
Dobbs, I'm going to say something. Saints fans, if you don't want to hear this, cover your ear. Lucas Patrick is your starting left guard.
See, that's not, I know. And that's why I'm saying, to Saints fans that don't know. There's a lot of Saints fans right now that don't know who Lucas Patrick is.
You don't want him on the field.
They haven't been paying enough attention to how bad Cesar Ruiz has been playing. There's a lot of Saints fans that I get it. I get it. They kind of have their head in the sand about the rest of the teams, and they're just about who that nation. I get it. Hey, Saints fans, I get it. But the bottom line is this. I'm telling you, Saints fans, is one of the most tapped in Saints fans. I live and breathe Saints. Saints fans. I do. You have to understand. I have seen this team at the pinnacle. Where I have been with my family watching this team hoist the Lombardi. And let me tell you, as I hope most of you Saints fans have as well, you guys have got to be realistic. This roster is so far from that roster where we know as Saints fans, at least we should, if we're not being delusional, what a good roster is. We know what a championship caliber roster looks like. We know what it looks like when we won. We know what it looks like when we got robbed of winning one. This roster is very far from that. And to your point, Hunter, let's just wrap it up with this. Bad O-line. You're spot on about the aging stars. We have stars, but they're old. And we always talk about Super Bowl windows. Well, if the Saints had a Super Bowl window, let's be real, Hunter, that bitch is being cracked open by a toothpick. And they would need to have the most miraculous season in history to go win the Super Bowl this
Honestly,
year.
I'm going to say this right now. It's like when you go to view an apartment or a house and the painter just painted over the window so you can't even open it. Like, if you really try to get under there, it might open, but you got to crack the paint. And that's how it feels with the Saints right now.
And you do. And that's the problem, Hunter, is too many Saints fans. I love it. I love that they want to be optimistic and hold on to the glory days that we just were recently through. But there hits a point where being positive when things are going negative is detriment to the future because you're essentially telling the organization, I'll keep throwing you money to keep making stupid decisions. Guys, come on. We have to, as Saints fans, say to ourselves, if this is another dismal season, there is not only does we, because to your point, I want to close out with this. You know, a lot of Saints fans are like, Derek Carr this, Derek Carr that. Look, Derek Carr is not moving the needle for me. And do I think he's a great quarterback? No.
The Saints have bigger issues.
But to your point, if Derek Carr had a productive O-line around him with the roster that they currently have, with how bad the NFC South is, not necessarily bad, but how everybody's so ready to compete with each other, I think the Saints very well can win this division. But when you put an O-line like that around Derek Carr, it's a dismal combination. It's dismal. The only person that can save us this year, as Saints fans would I think agree that are not overly optimistic. Look, let's just be real. If Clint Kubiak has the most amazing offense and pulls, right, and has everybody just shocked and confused and we got Taysom Hill out here running QB 7 snap. We got a bunch of crazy shit going on. Okay, you know what? Just maybe the Saints can get creative enough to pull out a playoff appearance. But if that's not the case, and obviously we know, yes, our defense is still going to be a good unit. I still have so much faith in this defense. I want to be crystal clear about that. I do have a lot of faith in this defense. But that's the bottom line. Is the Saints defense does not win most weeks. We're not going to win a lot of games necessarily. And it's the bottom line. And this is coming from the biggest fan of a team you could ever be. But I'm big enough of a fan that I'm also willing to be realistic. A lot of people claim to be big fans. They're going to sit here and bullshit you. I'm not going to sit here and bullshit you. The Saints have a lot of work to do, Who Dat Nation. And it starts with acknowledging it. I'm going to be the first to acknowledge it.
All right, let's move into our last team in the NFC South. We have the Buccaneers finishing at 8-9. I do think I am a little bit concerned going from Dave Canales, who kind of, I don't want to say resurrected Geno Smith's career, resurrected Baker's career. And now we have Tampa Bay with Liam Cohen. And I do think that their wide receiver room is fine. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Jalen McMillan. They have Cade Otton as well. A little concerned about the guard situation. I think they found their center in Graham Barton. But overall, I mean, this team is really talented. They have a really high floor, but I don't know if they necessarily have the biggest ceiling in the world. So I could see them winning 10 games and making the playoffs. I could also see them regressing to 8-9 and missing the playoffs.
Well, that's exactly how I had it. And I think my biggest thing was just this. Look, you could really, the Bucs is actually more of a simple recipe than anybody else. I think I'm going to tie it to, look, we got a whole new OC situation where the OC situation was working wonders last year. And we know how, a lot of people like to glaze over when there's a transition of course. Look, we use the Eagles as the most recent example. Like, it doesn't matter how good a team was beforehand. When operations change, and sometimes the result is drastically different. And I think the big thing with the Bucs on top of the operation changing is, and Bucs fans would agree with this, how confident were we, Hunter, in the operation from the Todd Bowles perspective? I mean, how confident are we and Bucs fans in Todd Bowles being the long-term head coach?
Right.
I think you start to consider all these things, and then you say, okay, look, the biggest thing. the success of this team, and far and away, it doesn't come down to their center more than any other team besides the Buccaneers. Because you just drafted, right? You just drafted Graham Barton to essentially be your plug and to replace who was a legend for you for so long. But the problem with that is now in Jensen. But the problem with that is that if he doesn't have a good season, right? If Barton comes out and has a stinker, kind of like how John Michael Schmidt did last year for the Giants, to kind of make a little comparison, you're stuck in a situation where you spent an early round pick on a lineman who, again, linemen sometimes can go from having terrible starts to their career to being really good. It's not like he would even be indicative that it's going to have a terrible career. But I'm just saying for this season specifically, if Barton doesn't have a good year, and yeah, you could, if you're a Bucs fan, you're saying to me, well, Brederson and Cody Mauch, they could have big jumps this year. But from a likeliness perspective, how bad that the tape was last year, and making a big enough jump this year that they are like game changers is going to be really hard to do. So I look at it from the perspective of like, you essentially right now have 3 defective positions on the O-line until Graham Barton can prove to me he's going to be a productive starter. So it's like, and yes, the tackle situation is actually really good, but having 2 tackles doesn't mitigate having 3 weaker interior positions. So it's like, I think losing the OC on top of the volatile O-line situation, on top of the volatile head coach situation, on top of, I think we could say this about the Bucs, very similar to the Saints. One thing that we could definitely say that they share in common is that their superstars are all getting old. So it's like,
I do feel a little bit more confident in the Bucs young defensive line, though.
I would agree with that. I definitely would. I would say like Yaya Diaby can make a big jump this year. We know Vita Vea. We know Kalijah Kancey is prone to making that jump, even though he was like the definition of volatile last year. So I agree with you 100% about that. It's kind of just the Bucs and the Saints.
Even their cornerback room was Zion McCollum being their number 2.
Well, exactly. That's the thing is, yes. And he could make a big jump, right? And when we talked to Mr. Bucks over, he was saying, that was his guy. But the bottom line to me, more than anything else, is like, look, this team could end up being the team that makes the playoffs at NFC South. I lean, though, towards a slight regression and perhaps even you could say almost like the direction of a regime change kind of starting.
Right. No, I feel you. It's definitely, the Bucs strike me as a team that they're banking on getting hot at the right time because they're not going to be bad enough to draft high, but they're also not top tier to win like the 1 seed,
No, absolutely. I think that's really the best evaluation for the Bucs. They're kind of like in the competing for this year, and outside of that, we're going to have to just figure it out going forward. They're kind of they're like wheeling and dealing.
Let's move in to the NFC West. We have the Arizona Cardinals. You have them at 8-9. I have them at 7-10. I think this is a team that we are probably a little bit higher on than a lot of people. I am a little bit concerned with their pass rush because, okay, this isn't the pass rush, but Zay Jones was suspended for 5 games. And then I believe Ojulari tore his ACL or something like that. So he's going to be out for the year. And I believe there was another injury to the D line. I think Darius Robinson is a little injured right now. I don't think it's all year, but it's something to monitor. Now, I do think that the biggest strength of the Cardinals is going to be their offense and their skill positions. I don't think their offensive line is the worst thing in the world. I think their tackle situation is shored up right now. Trey McBride, Marvin Harrison Jr., Michael Wilson, Greg Dortch, Zay Jones when he comes back, Zach Pascal. You have James Conner, who's been productive for them. You have Trey Benson. Like, this offense is not bad. It is not a bad unit. Now, they may sell on defense, but when you look at their secondary, they have Sean Murphy-Bunting, they have Budda Baker, they have Max Melton, who they spent an early draft pick on, who you hope can be there.
Our guy.
Dennis Gardeck, like, that's what I'm saying. Like, this team is not bad. I don't like their D-line really at all. Their linebacker situation is But overall, this team is starting to take form of the Monty Ossenfort vision, and I have really loved what he's done there. I think that the Cardinals are going to be, they were a feisty team last year. Like, when's the last time you could say that the Cardinals were a feisty team? Even with Cliff, yeah, they would win. They were talented, but they weren't feisty. They didn't feel like they wanted it. The Cardinals felt like they wanted it, and I have not seen a brighter future for the Cardinals in a long, long, long time.
You were spinning right there. No, and I know Cardinals fans are going to feel that because that was really the best way you could say that. Truthfully, I never even thought of it like that. But when they were way more talented, They didn't have that fucking fire in their gut.
They
Hunter.
didn't have the fire in their gut. Did
Did
they take the bus? Did they take the bus?
They weren't taking the bus. They had no fire in their gut. Look, and that's why I want to say what I want to kind of round into too is what you were saying. Look, this is the biggest thing for the Cardinals. I agree with you that this defense on paper, and Gannon would agree, realistically needs about 2 or 3 more years of draft capital into it to kind of round out his vision, I'm sure. But with that being said, you look at it and you say, okay, with what he did last year and the guys that have developed now and you have added, I think you can say to yourself, you know what? Gannon can do enough with this defense to have them be a middling out unit. And I would say that's what you'd expect for a Cardinals fan. Somewhere from 14th to 22nd, right? Let's say like that's a good range to have them in. But if you can do that with a productive offense, I think you can finish somewhere around right 7 and 10, 8 and 9, how I had them, and where you had them. And that's the thing is, I don't think they're a playoff team this year. I think despite their best efforts, even if they had, which again, we had them kind of sealing, however you want to say that out. I still don't think that they're a playoff team because of how tough the landscape of the division is right now. But the bottom line is, look, like we were saying earlier about a few other teams, you finally, like the Panthers, namely. Yeah, the immediate future is not the brightest thing, but you definitely can sit there and say, look, this team has a vision. They are attacking it. They are putting together a roster and putting together a window in the future. And as a fan base, again, that's always all you can ask for, because we look at a lot of teams every year that it's like a great quote from I don't remember exactly who it was. Who was it? Denzel Washington, where he said, just because you're moving, don't mistake movement for progress, because you can run in place. There's a lot of teams that run in place every year. And we mistake it for movement. I think you can see here and you look at the Cardinals and you say, yeah, they're moving though, but they're moving in the right direction. And granted, it might be slow. Granted, it might be a slow jog right now, but you see the direction. And to put the cherry on top of my whole spiel, I think I want to add that people forget that Kyler Murray is an MVP caliber quarterback when he's healthy. Like when Kyler in the Cliff offense, I want to add where back to the Cliff offense that would look really good, but
stagger,
and really stagnate. Like Kyler was still holding that offense together by a thread. So you give Kyler an evolved offense, you give Kyler evolved playmakers, one of the best tight ends in the league, hopefully one of already the better X receivers, literally from even his rookie year. I mean, realistically, Hunter, this Cardinals team can really surprise a lot of people this year.
I agree. I am optimistic about the Cardinals and actually really excited to see what they build. Well, let's move in to the Los Angeles Rams. You have them at 9 and 8. I have them at 10 and 7 as a playoff team. I am so high on the Rams this year. I think last year, what they did with the team, with a roster that we've been saying this kind of the last couple years with the Rams, like, I don't know. And they've always outperformed. And now they have a roster. They have Cooper Kupp. They have Puka Nacua. They have DeMarcus Robinson. And then you have Jordan Whittingham, who is lighting it up in the preseason. Not going to say this year's Puka, but, obviously they lose Alaric Jackson to a 2-game suspension, but I do think their offensive line is pretty decent. Their D-line is going to be very, very scary in a year or two. Brandon Fisk, Byron Young, Kobe Turner, they have Jared Verse, like, this team, man, this secondary, Cameron Curl, Tre'Davious White, Cam Kitchens, like Darius Williams, they have this team is one of my dark horse Super Bowl teams. I think they can come out of the NFC and win the Super Bowl. I am that confident in the Rams this year. I love what they did in the offseason.
No, you know what? Because I got to say this off the bat. The Rams are one of those teams where, you got to address it. Look, Rams fans. Somehow, through my simulation, you ended up 9 and 8 and you ended up not making the playoffs. And meanwhile, there was other 9 and 8 teams that made the playoffs. I do think that the Rams 100% can be a playoff team. Now, again, I'm a little bit less optimistic than you, Hunter, but to your point, this team still could win the Super Bowl. So Rams fans, don't be on me. I do believe you have a very, very talented roster, and I think you guys still are contenders. Now, again, you just unfortunately got the short end of the stick in my simulation, because that's sometimes how it goes with these simulations. It is very hard when you're doing it and you got to make each pick, and sometimes it doesn't go the way you thought it was going to go, which is kind of how it went for me in the Rams. But let's spin it kind of the opposite of Hunter. Let's say, okay, well, if they end up just missing out this year, like what would be the reasons for that? I think you would just point to this, right? Again, look, It's kind of simple. As much as I always will have faith in staff, it's not even about staff. It's the fact that we've kind of seen that this receiving core has been dealing with a little bit of injury problems over the past couple of years. Even Puka, as talented, as amazing as he is, right? Still, it's kind of banged up here and there, and it's kind of been like a little bit of a trend. But I don't expect it to be a problem. But with Cooper Kupp, we're kind of at the point now where Cooper Kupp is, is Cooper Kupp going to be super healthy the whole year? The O-line situation is still really good, though. The offense is not. I mean, I'm not sitting here worrying about the offense. I think the main thing is when you come over and you're like, okay, look, if this defense, the defense would be the reason. I think you'd say if Trey White comes back and Trey White's not, because he's not the old Trey White. Saying that would be a kind of a disservice to him because he never has necessarily been since like the injuries have piled up and he's not the same Trey White as that first Trey White that we all remember, that first Pro Bowler on the Bills, that real old version of him. But if he can come back and be a solid version, he's still a good starting corner. But if he comes back and he's volatile, I think you start looking at this DB room and you're like, yeah, they're solid, but there's some volatility there for sure. Where, I love Cam Curl, but Cam Curl, where it was very volatile last year, where he'd have 1 week where he looked amazing, and then the next week would be really rough. Quentin Laker starting safety, and then Christian Roseboom, and you also have Ernest Jones as your starting linebackers. It's not a bad duo. Ernest Jones actually had a pretty good year last year, but Roseboom, on the other hand, shaky. And just to round it all out, the D-line, if Braden Fisk and Jared Verse have really good rookie years, this D-line is absolutely loaded. Rams fans know how I feel about Kobe Turner if they've been listening. I think Bobby Brown made a good jump last year, and now he's going to really be getting those real starting reps and really just, dominating on that, not dominating, but that, throwing around his body on that interior with all these youngins around him. I mean, realistically, that's why I'm saying, they got the short end of the stick in the simulation.
Yeah.
But realistically, to your point, Hunter, this Rams team is still going to be ready to compete with anybody. And if they don't get the short end of the stick and they make the playoffs, they're a wild card to go be able to beat anybody any week.
Yeah, they're really one of those teams where it's like they could be the last seed in the playoffs, but it doesn't matter. Like if they make the playoffs, they can win the Super Bowl.
No, exactly. That's exactly how it is about the Rams.
Let's move in to our division winner, the San Francisco 49ers. You have them at 11-6. I have them at 12-5. I do think the 49ers probably still have the best roster in football. I will say their depth on their defensive line kind of fell off after this year or during this offseason. If I remember right, the people with the leading pressure rate from 3 in their depth from the 3rd to 7th pressure rate rusher are no longer on the team. I don't love their cornerback room. Hopefully Talisa Hufanga. How do you say his first name? I forgot.
No, what? How? Now you got me.
I almost called it Talisa.
Talanoa. I was gonna say it, and then now you got me thinking Talisa. No, Talanoa Hufanga.
So another thing is Dre Greenlaw going to come back to be his old self? I don't know. So with that being said, like, I think the 49ers, if you look at their offense, still have one of the best rosters in the league, but can their defense be back to what it has been? And will Brandon Ayuk still be on this roster week 1?
Well, that realistically, it's funny that somehow that's still months later, the biggest question around the Niners. The saga has to come to an end soon. It's actually getting painful to follow. Yeah. But yeah, I think we could agree though that we lean at this point. We lean that I don't know if we can necessarily see Ayuk in that Niners uniform likely next year. I think it's still a possibility, but I think we'd certainly lean towards that. How long it's been drawn out that he probably wants to get his money elsewhere, right? And I think that that's eventually going to be the terms that we come to here. But with all that being said, let's assume Ayuk is still here, though. Let's because he is right now.
Wait, let's preface this. This was recorded on August 24th.
Yeah, let's also preface this. But let's play, devil's advocate, and let's assume Ayuk is still here, right? Well, if Ayuk is still here, on top of the fact of what we had just learned about Ricky Pearsall, right? So it looks like the reps might be a little spotty this year in terms of where and when he's getting them with what he's dealing with the injury, the shoulder injury. So, I mean, look, this roster is still absolutely stacked. I think you should be excited if you're a Niners fan about Dominic Pooney, your new starting guard, right? I think you got a lot of upside there. I mean, this defense is still loaded. But to your point about Dre Greenlaw, you definitely know what to expect with Dre Greenlaw now coming back. I mean, that for a linebacker, especially, that injury is going to be very hard to come back from. It just unfortunately is. And, like you said about the D line, now you got some new faces on this D line, right? Like there's some fresh blood where, but I don't think it's a bad, like, right. Like Leonard Floyd, super experienced Super Bowl champ, been around in on a lot of good defenses with a lot of experience that he can bring to this team. It's not like it's a big drop off is what I'm trying to say. But irregardless, it's fresh blood on the defense a little bit. But all in all, I mean, to wrap it up as shortly as possible, the Niners are still absolutely loaded. To me, they still have no excuse not to go win the NFC West. And I think that that's really just the bottom line, is that this team is still just as ready to be competing for the Super Bowl as ever. They kind of, yeah, for what they lose, that they replace pretty well. And it's like, that's kind of been the theme of the Niners for a while now. Yeah, there's questions around the O-line, the new faces on the O-line as well. But I think kind of like we talked about, like this whole offseason, it's like, and with Wayne, when we had Wayne on for our Niners collab, it was like, as long as these guys can move horizontal and they move east and west, like it'll work. And it's kind of what they've done with their O-line. So it's like, I'm not really worried about it.
I guess my thing is they got to pay Trent, and the Niners are kind of in like the worst position ever. Not like realistically, but it's almost like if you don't make the Super Bowl, it's kind of like, okay, what was the season for? Like it's just in a tough spot because you're going to have to pay Purdy, you're going to have to pay Trent, you're going to have to play Ayuk. And it's like, this is really one of the last years, not that they can make or win a Super Bowl, but that they should be expected to win it, like before the big decisions really come. So it's going to be probably a tough season, not from a like win-loss standpoint, but more of like oh God, like there's a lot of pressure on us.
That's what I was just about to say. If we're going to talk about the one thing that actually is the biggest problem with this Niners roster, it's that you did it to yourself, unfortunately, but and the fans, you got so close so many times that there's innately it's in the back of your head, right? Like, we got to get it done. But unfortunately, for a lot of human beings,
we don't get to see our teams don't get to go that far.
Yeah, exactly. But it puts an opposite effect in, right? The more that you focus on the end goal, the less likely you are to really. It's about the process. So that's really the main thing. Is if the Niners stay locked in on the process this year and they treat it like they've never even been to the Super Bowl and just like every other, right, it's just another year. This Niners team is as talented as anybody, and they can go do anything that they want to do. But if they lock in that bug in the back of their head, especially Shanny, we got it. We got to get it done. If you put that pressure on yourself, it's almost a death sentence. Just 1 week at a time, the Niners can do anything. But if they play with pressure, I think we're going to see a rattled Niners team, especially come later in those playoffs. It's just about staying locked in, tunnel vision this year.
Last team of our record predictions, we have the Seattle Seahawks at 7-10, and I had them at 8-9, both missing the playoffs. I do like the floor of this team. I think the floor is honestly 7 wins. I think they have enough talent. I do like the Connor Williams signing. I'm still a little bit concerned about the other, Laken Tomlinson, Anthony Bradford. I do like the offensive skill position still. And I've heard Byron Murphy has been tearing it up at practice and in the preseason. So I'm optimistic about what this team can be, but it does feel like at some point within the next year or two, they're going to have to pivot from the quarterback position. And this year does feel like a year of we need to figure out what we have before we make any drastic moves. And I think that's what Mike McDonald is doing. And I think that's why they let a lot of people walk in free agency.
100%. And, I think I'll even throw the Seahawks into this, like, I'm sorry I got to do this to you guys, Seahawks fans, but like, I respect that you guys are always riding for your squad every year and you guys are never willing to take any disrespect and that you think you guys are Super Bowl contenders every year. I really respect it. I do. But again, this is one of those ones where I can already see the comments. Seahawks fans are saying, "What are you talking about? We were right there last year competing. And not that much has changed. And we brought in a really young or good head coach with a lot of upside who just had the Ravens looking like an amazing unit on defense. How could we possibly have a regression to the point where we're starting to question what we're going to do going forward?" But that's kind of the point. Is I think too many Seahawks fans are like, I'm trying to think of the nicest way to say this, but all right, I'm just going to say it from my point of view. There's no nice way to say it. kind of locked in on this fantasy land that Geno Smith is for sure the long-term guy, and you're going to build a Super Bowl caliber roster around Geno Smith. Now, let me be clear. Is it in the realm of possibility? Sure. Is it possible? Sure. But back to likeliness. And if I was the one making the decisions, would I want to be putting my eggs in that basket? Personally, no. So I think that you're evaluating it from the perspective of, like you just said, Hunter, we got to make changes somewhere. And this year we got to really figure out where those changes are to be made. And this is a real evaluation year from the terms of like how Mike is going to want to build this team going forward. You really are evaluating who's here for the long haul. Who are we letting go of? Who are we not giving money to? Who needs money? This year's you're kind of putting together for the future, because back to just my bottom line is, do you think that Geno is the future of this team, Hunter?
I am optimistic, though, about their offense because of Grubb at Washington. Like, I think he worked really well when he was with Penix. He was with Odunze, McMillan, and Polk. And I do think, I'm not saying the receivers exactly represent what those guys were, but when you look at it from a skill position standpoint, like, he's working with a lot, and he had a really good offense. So I do think that, like, this offense will probably be pretty decent. Like, I just think this is more going to be one of those years where it's like, it might take a couple weeks for this team to get going. And by that point, 9-8 is going to look good.
No, absolutely. And, I just want to finish with this too, because Seahawks fans, let me be crystal clear. I would love to be wrong about Geno Smith not being the guy. And if Geno Smith could have another amazing year this year and shut me up, I would be ecstatic. I would love to see Geno Smith keep succeeding. But I'm just looking at it from the objectives perspective of, like, if you can get a better guy in the building and you have a very young roster like the Seahawks have, it has to be in the considerations. And that as far as Geno is concerned, is the bottom line.
I agree. Well, this has been our record predictions for the 2024 NFL season. Thank you guys so much for watching. By the time this video airs, I would imagine the season is probably starting with the way I have the video scheduled. So thank you guys so much for watching. As always, if you don't know ball, want to know ball, be sure to subscribe. Luckily, we've gotten some access to some pretty cool statistical information, something that we haven't had in prior, seasons. So we're hoping to really be able to level up the show this year. And thank you guys, everyone who's been supported watching, and we're looking forward to a great 2024.